The graft was 3 days old when the human girl turned her head toward a wall that had nothing behind it and said, quietly, that the man on the other side was carrying a knife. Sarah Vaughan had 4 hands and used all of them to hold her still. She was not fighting him. That was the part he would remember later when he tried to explain it to people who had never stood in the room. She lay flat on the recovery cradle with the fresh suture line glowing pale along the base of her skull, and she was calm, and she pointed with her chin at brush steel plating a full body length away, and she told him there was a blade over there, low near a hip, wrapped in something cold. "There is a maintenance corridor behind that wall," Sarah said. His translator softened his voice to the register the clinic used for the disoriented. "No one is there. You are feeling the graft settle. This is expected. The new tissue sends noise before it sends sense." "It's not noise." She did not raise her voice. Humans, he had learned, rarely did when it mattered. "It's a shape. It's got a weight to it and it's colder than the wall." He almost sedated her. His hand was already on the dispenser. What stopped him was the small, procedural certainty in her face, not fear, not the wild insistence of a mind coming apart, but the flat attention of someone reading a gauge. She was not describing a hallucination. She was describing a measurement. Sarah left her cradled and walked out into the corridor to prove her wrong. The maintenance passage ran behind the recovery ward, and it was, as the schematic promised, empty of patients. It was not empty of people. A cleaning tech from the reptilian caste, green-scaled, low to the ground, the kind of laborer the station hired by the thousand and looked at never, was crouched at an access panel with a service cart. Perfectly ordinary. Sarah had passed 100 of them since morning. He nodded the caste-neutral greeting and turned to go, satisfied, and then he stopped, because the human's words were still in his ears, and he made himself look at the thing he was trained never to look at. The tech's service belt held the usual tools. Below them, against the hip, under a fold of the coverall, was a slim, rigid line the shape of nothing a cleaning cart needed. Sarah was a surgeon. He knew the outline of a cutting edge when it was pressed under cloth. He also knew, with the cold clarity of a man whose whole science had just been insulted, that the fold of coverall over that shape was not cloth at all. It shimmered wrong at the edges. It was a masking wrap, the commercial kind, the kind that ate the signature of whatever it covered so that no scanner, no field sweep, no security arch in the station would register the object beneath it as anything but background. By every instrument the galaxy possessed, there was nothing at that hip. The human girl, 3 days out of surgery, blind to the corridor, deaf since the accident that had brought her to him, had felt it through a wall. Sarah did not confront the tech. He was not a brave man in that particular way. He walked back into the ward with his heart running fast and his 4 hands cold, and he stood over the cradle and looked down at the small creature he had, by his own hand, changed into something the station did not have a category for. "You were right," he said. "I know," said Nadia Cole. "Can you make it stop? It's very loud in here." He had not set out to build a weapon. Sarah wanted that understood later by everyone who would listen and most who would not. He had set out to give a deaf girl back a way to feel the world. She had come into the Ossery Reach Clinic 4 weeks earlier as a salvage hand off the outer docks, one of the human contractors the station tolerated, because they would go into wrecks that killed anything with proper instincts and come back out with the cargo. A pressure door had failed on her during a hull strip. The decompression had not killed her. Humans were absurdly hard to kill. That was half of what the galaxy hated about them. But it had taken her hearing, both sides, permanent, the delicate inner architecture scarred past any regrowth the clinic could offer at her pay grade. Sarah had offered her something else. He was Meshari, of the healer lineages, four-armed and soft-spoken, and if he was honest with himself, ambitious in the quiet way of scholars who have been told all their lives that their species is gentle and clever and never, ever first. He had been developing a graft, not a repair, a substitution. A lattice of engineered tissue seated along the sensory cortex, tuned to register the ambient pressure field that every mass and every charged edge in a space quietly bent around itself. Every species felt this field a little. Some insects navigated by it. No one had a dedicated organ for it. Sarat's idea, elegant on the bench, was to grow a human one, to let a person who had lost sound feel the shape of a room instead, the lean of a wall, the near-body warmth of a crowd. The consent had been real. He wanted that on record too. Nadia had read the whole disclosure through the translator twice and had asked exactly one question, which was whether it would let her keep working the docks. He had said probably yes. She had said then do it, and had signed with a thumbprint because her species did that, and had gone under without a sound because of course she had. He had expected the graft to give her walls. He had not expected it to give her weapons. They kept her in the clinic 4 more days while Sarat, telling no one why, learned the dimensions of what he had done. He did it carefully because he was already afraid of it. He would walk a member of staff past her door and ask her afterward what she had felt. She was accurate in a way that stopped being interesting and started being frightening around the second afternoon. The pharmacist carried nothing. She said nothing. The intake clerk carried a folding blade in an ankle sheath. Legal, declared, unremarkable on any station. She named it, the ankle, the size, the fact that it was folded. A security officer came through on rounds with a sidearm openly holstered, and a second weapon he had not declared to anyone. A compact charge slug piece tucked at the small of his back under a masking patch, and Nadia went still and said there were 2, and the second one was hidden, and it was hot in a way the first one wasn't. Sarat checked, quietly through a record's favor at some risk. The officer had a second weapon. It was not on any manifest. It was wrapped. That was the thing that took the ground out from under him. Not that she could feel a knife. That she could feel a knife somebody had spent money to make unfeelable. The whole architecture of civilized space rested, gently and completely, on the fact that a concealed thing was concealed. Treaties were built on it. Border crossings, credit exchanges, the entire courteous fiction of a neutral transit hub like Osiri Reach, where 100 hostile species docked and did business and did not murder each other in the concourse. All of it assumed that what you hid stayed hidden, that a masking wrap was a wall, that behind the wall you were private. Every power in the sector had its hidden edges. Everyone knew everyone was armed. The peace held precisely because no one could prove it, could point, could count. Sarat had grown a girl who could point. "You have to understand what this is," he told her on the 4th day in the small private ward, with the door sealed and the translator turned down low. "You have to understand it before you leave this room." Nadia was sitting up by then, eating a protein brick from the human commissary. The graft line at her neck faded to a thin silver seam. She had a salvage-hand's build, wiry and scarred, short dark hair growing back unevenly over a shaved patch, a smear of clinic grease on one cheekbone she had not bothered to wipe. She looked at him with the flat patience he was learning to read as human attention rather than human insolence. "It's a sense," she said. "You gave me a sense, that was the deal." "It is a sense that no one else in the galaxy has," Sarat said. "It is a sense that sees through the one thing everyone in this station is paying not to be seen. Do you understand how many people on Osiri Reach are carrying something wrapped right now? Do you understand what they would do to keep it wrapped?" She chewed, she swallowed, she set the brick down. "How many?" she said. Not who would come for her, not how frightened she should be. How many? The measurement again. Sarat felt the small, cold slide of a man realizing the creature in front of him was not going to react the way his whole culture insisted a small plaything should react to a large threat. "I don't know," he admitted. "Then let's find out," said Nadia Cole and reached for her boots. The concourse of Osiri Reach was the busiest daylit space Sarat knew, and he had spent his whole career telling himself it was safe. It ran a full third of a length around the station's inner ring, a vaulting hall roofed in clear structural glass, through which the amber gas giant the station orbited poured a constant flat daylight, so that no matter the ship hour the concourse was always bright, always noon. Under that light moved every species with business in the sector, the tall bureaucratic the crowds of green-scaled reptilian labor and their armored kin, cephalopod brokers in their pressure suits, the pale scholarly Meshari like himself, slate-skinned nobles from the inner houses gliding through with their retinues, a scatter of human contractors who drew the eye by being small and dense and unbothered. Kiosks, credit arches, transit gates, 1,000 people at any moment, a piece 3 generations deep. Sarat walked Nadia out into it because she had asked him to and because some part of him, the scientist he could not switch off, needed to know the number. She stopped 4 paces past the ward's outer door. He watched it happen, and he would never forget it. She stopped, and her breath changed, and her eyes moved, not scanning the crowd the way a nervous person scans, but tracking, settling, snagging, the way a person's eyes move when they are reading a page too dense to take in all at once. Her jaw tightened. She put one hand out and touched the cool glass of a shuttered kiosk to steady herself. "Talk to me," Sarat said. "What is it? What do you feel?" "Everything," Nadia said. Then more quietly in the flat cataloging voice he was coming to dread. "There's one at the tea stand. There's 1, 2, 3 on the transit line, right side, all carrying, all wrapped. There's a whole rack of them behind the customs arch. That's not people, that's a case. It's cold and it's heavy and it's the size of a coffin. There's one above us." She tipped her head back toward the bright glass roof and the gas giant beyond it. "There's a lot of them above us." Sarat looked up at the daylight and saw nothing, because there was nothing to see, because that was the entire point. "That can't be right," he said. It was the last time for a long while that he would say those words to her. "It's not a maintenance corridor this time," Nadia said, still looking up, still calm, still eating nothing, doing nothing, moving not at all while the whole bright concourse flowed around the two of them. "You want the number, doctor. Give me a minute. I'm still counting." The number, when she gave it, was 411. She gave it to him back in the sealed ward an hour later, sitting on the cradle with her boots on and her hands loose between her knees, reciting it the way another person might recite a shopping list. 411 wrapped edges within the range of the concourse and its immediate feeder corridors. She had stopped counting the declared weapons, the honest holsters and the legal sheaths, after the first minute, those she described as loud but open, and she waved them off. 411 were the ones somebody had paid to erase. "That's a lot of knives," she said. "They are not knives," Sarat said. He had brought a station schematic up on the ward's display, the concourse rendered in cold blue lines, and he was trying to make his 4 hands stop moving. "A knife is a personal weapon. You described a case behind the customs arch the size of a body. You described a mass above us in the dock ceilings that you said felt like the racks in an armory. Nadia, that is not a station where people carry hidden knives. That is a station where someone has built a hidden army and hung it from the ceiling in the daylight where no one can see it." She thought about that. She was good at thinking about things. It was another thing that unsettled him, the way she took a horror in and turned it over and set it down without flinching. "Why here?" she said. "It's a neutral station, everybody docks here, nobody fights here, that's the whole point of it, right? You told me that. That's why the human crews come. It's the one port where nobody shoots you for being a deathworlder." "That is the whole point of it," Sarat agreed, "which is exactly why it is worth taking." He said it, and then he heard himself say it, and the last of his comfortable ignorance went out of him like air. Ossuary Reach was the neutral heart of the sector. 9 species blocks used it. The treaty that kept it neutral was old and toothless, and depended entirely on the fact that no block could move a fleet or a force into the station without every other block seeing it come and matching it. You could not stage an army at Ossuary Reach. Everyone would know. The security arches would count every barrel. The whole balance of the sector rested on that, on the station being untakeable because it was unhideable. Unless you had learned to make an army that the arches could not count. Unless you had spent years, quietly, at the cost of a fortune, wrapping every weapon in the commercial masking that ate its signature, and shipping the pieces in one at a time as background, as cargo, as nothing, and hanging them in the ceilings, and packing them behind the customs arch, and handing them to green-scaled cleaning techs who crouched at access panels no one watched. Unless you had built, in plain daylight, in the one place a weapon could not be seen, the force that would take the station in an afternoon. And no one would have known, no one could have known, the concealment was perfect. It had been perfect for exactly as long as concealment was the same thing as safety, which was to say, until 3 days ago, when a Meshari surgeon had grown a girl an organ for feeling the shape of a room. "You need to report this," Nadia said. "Yes," said Sarat and did not move. "You're not going to report this." "I am thinking," he said, "about who I would report it to." That was the second thing that took the ground out from under him, and it was worse than the first. Because to report 411 wrapped weapons in the concourse, he would have to go to station security. And the second undeclared weapon Nadia had felt, on the second day, wrapped and hot at the small of a back, had been carried by a station security officer. Her name for the sense was the weight. She explained it to him over the next 2 days in the sealed ward, because he asked and because, he suspected, no one had asked her many things in her life, and she found it novel to be studied by someone who wrote down her answers. It was not sight. It was not sound, though it had filled the silence the accident had left, which she said was the only good thing about it. It was closest to the feeling of a hand held near a wall in the dark, that pressure you feel before you touch, except everywhere, all the time, in every direction, ranked by weight and by a quality she could only call temperature. A declared weapon was warm and open. A wrapped weapon was colder, the masking, she thought. The thing that ate its signature also made it feel dead, and a dead cold weight in a room full of warm living pressure stood out to her like a hole cut in cloth. "That's what makes them stupid," she said. "They wrapped everything so nobody could see it, but now there's a wrap-shaped hole where the weapon is, and the hole's the exact shape of the thing they were hiding. They didn't hide it. They cut it out of the room and left the outline." Sarat wrote that down too. He was, despite everything, exhilarated. It is a terrible thing to admit that the moment his civilization's peace began to end was also the proudest moment of his scientific life. But Sarat had promised himself he would be honest, and the truth was that he had made a sense that turned the galaxy's cleverest concealment into its loudest signal, and no one had ever done anything like it, and part of him wanted to publish. The rest of him wanted to get the girl off the station alive. "You can turn it down," he told her. "The graft has a modulation. I can dampen the input. I designed the dampening for exactly this, for the noise. You would still have it. You would just be able to," he searched for the human word, "to close your eyes with it. Do you want me to dampen it?" She considered the offer with the seriousness she gave everything. "No," she said finally. "If I'm the only one who can see them, I don't think closing my eyes is the move." "It is going to hurt," Sarat said. "Not the graft, the knowing. You are going to walk through that concourse and feel 400 weapons wanting to stay hidden, and you are going to be the only person who can feel them, and that is a weight no one should carry alone." "I've carried things," said Nadia Cole. "Get me a way to prove it and I'll carry this too." Proving it was the problem, and it was Sarat who first understood the shape of the problem, because Sarat had spent his life inside institutions and knew how they defended themselves. He could not walk into the marshal's office and say a human patient of his could feel hidden weapons through walls. They would sedate her, or worse, they would believe him. And if the wrong ear heard it, if a marshal in the syndicate's pocket carried the word back up the line, then the only thing that would happen is that a green-scaled cleaning tech would come to the clinic one night with a wrapped edge on his hip, and the problem of the human girl who could see would quietly cease to exist. He needed proof that did not depend on her being believed. He needed a hidden weapon, felt by Nadia, then found by someone else, by an instrument, by an honest hand, so that the finding proved the feeling. And he needed to do it without the syndicate. He had started calling them the syndicate in his head, having no better word for whoever hangs an army in a ceiling. Noticing that a small deaf human had started pointing at their invisible things. "One," he told her. "We prove one. We pick a wrapped weapon in a place I can reach, somewhere I have a reason to be, and you tell me exactly where it is, and I find a way to have it found by the record. One proven weapon that no scanner saw and a human felt. That is a thing I can build on. That is a thing that survives me if they take me." "If they take you," Nadia repeated. "I am a Meshari surgeon who has learned something the syndicate would end a station to keep secret," Sarat said. "I would be very foolish to plan as though I will be alive next month." She looked at him for a long moment then, and something moved behind her flat human calm that he did not have the experience to read, and she said, "Then we'd better make it count." And that was the moment, he decided afterward, that they stopped being a doctor and a patient, and became two people on the same side of a wall that the whole rest of the station was standing on the other side of. They chose the customs arch. It was Sarat's idea, and it was a good one, because the customs arch was the one place on Osiri Reach where finding a hidden weapon was somebody's actual job. The arch swept every parcel and passenger that entered the concourse from the deep dock levels. It was staffed by the marshals but audited by the Neutral Treaty Office, whose officers rotated in from off-station and could not, by the treaty's own paranoid design, be local, be bought, be part of any block's long game. If a treaty auditor found an undeclared weapon behind the customs arch, the finding went into a record that 9 species blocks could read and none could erase. Nadia had felt a case there, coffin-sized, cold, heavy, behind the arch in the marshal's own secure holding, in the one place a weapon was most certainly not supposed to be and least likely to be looked for, because who searches the searchers? "You are sure of it," Sarat said. "The case, behind the arch." "I've walked past it 3 times now," Nadia said. "It hasn't moved. It's the biggest cold thing on this level that isn't the ceiling. I could find it blind." She paused. "I am blind. I could find it blinder." He did not laugh. He was learning that humans made these small, flat jokes not because they found the situation funny, but because the joke was a way of setting a weight down for a second so you could pick it back up. He filed it with the rest of what he was learning about them, which by now filled more of his private records than the graft itself. The plan was thin, and he knew it. Sarat had a treaty auditor he half-trusted, a cephalopod named Al who owed him for a wound closed off the books, and Sarat could get Al to run an unscheduled audit of the arch holding if he gave Al a reason. And the reason could be a tip, an anonymous tip, and the tip could point at the case. And if the case was there, and it was wrapped, and it was weapons, then Al's own instruments finding it behind the marshal's arch would be the first crack, the first thing on the record. The first place the perfect concealment failed. It required only that Nadia be right, that Al be honest, and that no one in the syndicate noticed the surgeon and his patient taking an unusual interest in the customs level. 2 of the 3 held. The third did not, because the syndicate had not built an invisible army by being careless about who took an interest in it, and there was a green-scaled cleaning tech who had, 3 days earlier, felt a Meshari surgeon look too long at his hip, and had reported it, because that was his actual job, and the report had gone up the line to people who did not believe in coincidences and did not survive by ignoring them. By the time Sarat and Nadia walked the customs level to fix the case's position for Al's audit, the syndicate already knew that a surgeon from the sensory graft clinic had, 72 hours ago, walked into an empty maintenance corridor as though he expected to find someone in it. And the syndicate, unlike Sarat, did not need to be told twice what that meant. All the treaty auditor ran the unscheduled audit on the fourth shift of the following day, and the case behind the customs arch was exactly where the human girl said it would be, and it was full of weapons that no instrument on Osiri Reach had ever registered, and none of that went the way Sarat had planned, because he had planned for the concealment to fail, and had not planned for what the concealment failing would do to a man like All. Sarat was not in the holding room when it opened. That had been the arrangement. He stayed clear. Nadia stayed clear. The finding had to be All's and All's alone, or it proved nothing. He waited in a transit alcove 2 levels up with Nadia beside him, and he watched the audit's public log tick over on a shared feed, and he saw the moment the case was opened because the feed simply stopped updating. "He's found it," Nadia said. She had her back to the wall and her eyes half closed and her attention pointed down and inward through 2 decks of station at the cold coffin weight she had been tracking for a day. "He opened it. He's not moving. He's been not moving for a while now." "He is frightened," Sarat said. "He should be," said Nadia. "There's 40 of them in that case. 40 long ones. That's not smuggling, doctor. Nobody smuggles 40 battle-length weapons through a treaty port for the money. You smuggle 40 of anything through a treaty port, because you're going to use 40 of them here." Sarat had done the same arithmetic and had been trying not to say it aloud. 40 in one case. Nadia had felt cases like it stacked in the dock ceilings. 411 wrapped edges in the concourse alone. This was not contraband. This was a garrison, prepositioned, waiting for a signal, and the only question that mattered anymore was whose signal, and when. The feed came back. All had filed. The record now held a single cold line: unmanifested ordnance recovered, customs holding, 40 units, masking grade concealment referred for treaty inquiry, and that line could not be erased, and 9 blocks could read it, and Sarat let himself breathe for the length of one breath before Nadia stood up straight off the wall and said, in the flat voice, "We need to move. Now. There's one coming up the transit line and it's cold and it's fast and it's coming to this alcove." Sarat did not question it. That was the change in him, and he noticed it even as it happened, a Meshari surgeon, whose whole caste flinched from certainty, taking a small deaf human's word about a weapon he could not see and moving his body on it without a heartbeat of doubt. They went out of the alcove the far side, into a service stair, and behind them the transit line hummed and a green-scaled passenger stepped off it with a wrapped cold thing at his hip and found the alcove empty. The enforcer's name, though Sarat never learned it, was Thes, and Thes was very good at his work, and his work that day was to find out how much a surgeon knew and then to make the surgeon stop knowing it. Thes belonged to the syndicate the way a tooth belongs to a jaw. He was one of the green-scaled labor caste that the station hired and ignored, which was the entire reason the syndicate had built its army out of them. A reptilian cleaning tech was furniture, was background, was a thing the tall blocks looked through, and an army of furniture had hung 400 wrapped weapons in the daylight of the concourse over 3 years without one manifest officer glancing twice. Thes had carried in 9 of those weapons himself, one at a time, wrapped as cargo, as nothing. He was proud of it in the flat way of a man proud of a hard job done invisibly. He had expected the surgeon to be a soft target. Meshari were soft targets. It was practically their species straight, gentle, clever healers who had never in their recorded history struck first. He had not expected the surgeon to be gone from the alcove before Thes arrived, as though the surgeon had known Thes was coming up the line, which was impossible, because Thes was wrapped, because Thes had been wrapped his whole working life, because the entire point of Thes was that no one saw him coming. He stood in the empty alcove and felt, for the first time in 3 years, the specific unease of a hidden man who suspects he has been seen. He did not like it. He reported it up the line, surgeon forewarned, displaced on contact, source of forewarning unknown, and the report climbed the syndicate's quiet ladder rung by rung until it reached the desk of the person who had built the invisible army, and that person read it and understood, faster than Sarat had, faster than Nadia had, exactly what it meant. Somewhere on Osiri Reach there was an eye that could see the Rapt, and an invisible army was worth precisely nothing the moment one eye in the galaxy could see it, because the eye would multiply. Eyes always multiplied. The Syndicate had spent a fortune in 3 years buying the one advantage the neutral station could not defend against, and now there was a crack in it the width of a single human skull, and the only sane response to a crack in a dam is to stop it before it widens, whatever the cost, whoever it kills. The order went back down the ladder in 4 words: find the eye, close it. Somebody's hunting us, Nadia said. She said it the way she said everything, flat, as a fact to be worked with rather than felt. They were in the deep dock levels now, below the daylight, in the human contractor's berth where Sarat had never in his life set a foot, among crews and cargo, and the particular loud carelessness of people the station considered disposable. Since the alcove. There's cold weights moving in patterns. They're not going anywhere. They're looking. That's what it feels like when they're looking. They slow down and they spread out and they keep the same distance from each other, like a net. How many? Sarat said. Her word now, her measurement, and he used it without irony. 6 that I can feel from here, she said. There'll be more up in the concourse where I can't feel this far. 6 down here, wrapped, spread in a net, moving slow. She looked at him. They know it's us, or they know it's you and they're pulling the thread. Either way, they're going to find the clinic, and when they do, they're going to find your records, and your records say exactly what you did to me and exactly what it does. Sarat had already understood this. It was the reason he had not gone back to the clinic. But hearing it in her flat voice made it a thing outside his own fear, a thing on the record, and he made a decision that he would spend the rest of his life being unable to regret. Then the records need to be somewhere they cannot close, he said. Not the clinic, not the marshals, not any single desk in this station, because any single desk can be bought or buried or killed. The finding of the case is on the treaty record now, that survives. But the finding of the case only proves there is an army. It does not prove there is an eye. And an army they can explain away as smuggling. And a smuggling charge is a fine and a scandal and a year of inquiry while they finish what they started. What they cannot explain away, what ends this is you, standing in front of the treaty blocks, pointing at 400 wrapped weapons in the daylight, one at a time, and being right about every one, while their own instruments find nothing, until the instruments are made to look, and the instruments find everything. Nadia thought about it. He watched her think about it, watched her turn it over with that terrible calm, and he understood what he was asking her to do, to walk out of the dark where she could hide and stand up in the brightest, most watched space in the sector, and make herself the one thing the Syndicate most needed dead, in front of everyone on purpose. That's the plan, she said. Walk into the concourse and point. That is the plan. They'll have 50 guns on me before I finish the sentence. Yes, said Sarat, and hated himself, and did not look away. They will have 50 wrapped guns on you, and you will be the only person in the concourse who knows exactly where all 50 of them are. She was quiet for a long moment. Down the berth, a human crew was arguing cheerfully about cargo weights, loud and unafraid, deathworlders in the dark of a station that feared them, and Nadia listened to none of it because she could not hear, and felt, Sarat supposed, all of it, the whole cold and warm weight of the level pressing on the new organ he had grown behind her eyes. Okay, she said, but not just me pointing. Nobody's going to believe a deaf salvage hand pointing at empty air. You said it yourself. The finding has to prove the feeling. So when I point, something has to open. Every time I point, an instrument has to look where I'm pointing and find the thing. You get me the instruments. You get me somebody honest holding the instruments, and I'll get you the army. Sarat looked at the small, scarred human in the human dark, and felt the last of his species' gentle certainty about its own place in the galaxy quietly die. You are not what the records say you are, he said. Any of the records, ours or yours. No, Nadia agreed. We're really not. They raided the clinic that night, and Sarat was not in it, and that was the only reason there was still a surgeon left to matter. He learned of it from all, who came down to the human birth himself, which took courage Sarat had not been certain the cephalopod possessed. All arrived pressure-suited and jittery, his mottled skin flickering the gray-fast patterns of a frightened cephalopod, and he found Sarat by the simple method of asking the human crews where the four-armed doctor was hiding, because the human crews, it turned out, had already decided to hide him. They took your clinic apart, Al said without preamble, his suit speaker flattening the words. Marshals, a compliance sweep they called it. Record seizure, patient files, the whole graft program. It is very thorough and it is very quiet and it has your name on the top of it, Sarat. Someone wants everything you know and everything you did, and they want it in a sealed evidence locker where no block can read it, and they filed the paperwork so fast and so clean that it was ready before your case was even found. Do you understand what that means? It means they were already coming for me, Sarat said, before the case, the moment they knew the surgeon looked at the corridor. It means, Al said, that the compliance office is theirs, which I did not know, and which frightens me more than the 40 weapons, because the compliance office answers to the marshals and the marshals answer to the station executive. And if it goes all the way up then, there is no clean desk on this station, none. And the thing I found today is going to be reclassified as a paperwork error by morning, and I am going to be reassigned somewhere I cannot file anything. And that is if I am lucky. Sarat absorbed it. Beside him, Nadia watched Al's flickering skin with the frank attention she gave anything new, and Sarat realized she was reading the cephalopod's fear off the light of him the way Sarat read a wound. Then we do not use a desk, Sarat said. Al, listen to me. The finding of the case is filed. It is on the treaty record for one reason, because you found it before they knew to stop you. They cannot unfind it, they can only bury the inquiry, but the inquiry is not the weapon. You are not the weapon is her. He did not gesture at Nadia. He had learned she disliked being pointed at, an irony he savored. She felt that case through 2 decks. She felt 400 more in the concourse. She can stand in front of the assembled treaty blocks and name every wrapped weapon in the daylight, and the only thing that turns her into proof instead of a raving human is an honest instrument, held by an honest hand, that looks where she points and finds what she felt. You are the honest hand. Your instruments are treaty sealed. Their readings cannot be locally altered. If she points and your arch confirms, live, in front of 9 blocks, that is not a paperwork error. That is the end of them. Al's skin went very still, which in a cephalopod was the equivalent of a long breath. You want to convene the blocks, he said. You want to stand a deaf human contractor in the middle of the concourse and have her accuse the entire station of harboring a hidden army. And you want me to bet my treaty credentials and probably my life on her being right about 400 things in a row. 411, Nadia said. Al looked at her. It's 411, she said again flatly. In the concourse. It was 411 2 days ago. It's more now, they've been moving them since your case got found. Whatever they're building up to, your audit moved their clock. So if you want to bet on me, auditor, bet soon. Because in a day or two, it's not going to be 400 wrapped weapons waiting for a signal. It's going to be the signal. The signal had a date, though none of them knew it yet, and the date belonged to a slate-skinned noble named Ussar Daloon, of the inner house of Vheim, who had never in her long, clean life crouched at an access panel or wrapped an edge or carried a thing one at a time as cargo, and who had, nonetheless, built the whole of it. Daloon did her building at a distance, from the noble tier above the concourse, from a glass-walled reception suite where the amber daylight of the gas giant lay across white stone, and the concourse crowds moved far below like weather. She was elegant and unhurried and entirely without cruelty, which made her more dangerous than any brute in the green-scaled cast she employed, because Daloon did not want to hurt anyone. She wanted the station. She wanted the neutral heart of the sector to belong, quietly and irreversibly, to House V. Heim, so that when the next war came, and a war was always coming, her house would hold the one port every block had to pass through, and would hold it not by conquest, which the treaty forbade and the blocks would punish, but by ownership, by having simply been inside the walls all along, with 400 wrapped weapons and an army of invisible furniture, on the day she chose. She had chosen the day. It was close. It was tied to the treaty rotation, to the week when the off-station auditors changed over and the new ones had not yet learned the station, and the old ones had already gone, the one seam in the year when the neutral oversight blinked. On that day the signal would go down the ladder, and 411 wrapped weapons would become 411 bared ones in the space of a breath, in the daylight, in the concourse, and the marshals who were hers would seal the docks. And by the time any block off station understood what had happened, Ossery Reach would be a fact, and facts, DeLune knew, were the only thing the galaxy respected. Then a cleaning text report had climbed her ladder, and DeLune had read 4 words, surgeon forewarned, source unknown, and had set down her cup of pressed daylight wine, and understood that somewhere in her perfect invisible plan there was an eye. She did not panic. DeLune had not built what she built by panicking. She simply moved the day up, and put the whole ladder to work finding the eye, and reflected, with the mild regret of a tidy person facing an unexpected mess, that whoever the eye belonged to was already dead and simply had not been informed. She was wrong about that, but only about the order of things. She had the right idea. She had merely underestimated how much a small hard creature from a scorched world could do in the time between being marked for death and dying, which was the specific and recurring mistake that the galaxy made about humans, and had been making, and would go on making, in Sarat's private and increasingly odd opinion, right up until the species learned better or ran out of galaxy. The net found them at dawn shift, in the human birth, and it was Nadia who felt it close. Up, she said, and she was already moving, and Sarat had learned to move when she said up. 6 of them. They came down the freight lift together and they split at the bottom, and now they're closing. They know the level. They don't know the berth. They're feeling their way, cold and slow, checking the crew bays. We've got maybe 2 minutes before the 2 on the left reach us. All made a sound through his suit speaker that did not translate. Sarat took the auditor by a suited arm and pulled him along in Nadia's wake, through the cargo-stacked dark of a berth built for creatures who did not fear the dark. And around them the human crews were waking, and something happened then that Sarat had not planned and could not have planned, because he did not yet understand humans well enough to have counted on it. The human crews closed around them. They did not ask what was happening. A salvage boss named Reyes, a big weathered human with a voice like gravel, took one look at Nadia's face, and whatever a human reads in another human's face, it was enough, and started giving orders in the human tongue, and the crews moved cargo, and the crews stood in aisles, and the crews became, without a weapon drawn, a maze of large, unbothered bodies between the 6 wrapped enforcers and the 3 people the enforcers had come to kill. It was not a fight. It was worse than a fight, from the syndicate's view. It was 40 deathworlders deciding, on the strength of one look, that the small deaf one was theirs, and arranging themselves into a wall that a green-scaled enforcer would have to start a massacre to get through. A massacre, in the daylight-adjacent dark, in front of 40 witnesses, on a station where the whole plan depended on no one seeing anything until the chosen day. The enforcers stopped at the edge of the human berth and did not come in. Nadia felt them stop. She felt them stand there, cold and wrapped, 6 killers held at bay by cargo and body heat, and the flat refusal of a species that did not have the sense to be afraid. "They're not coming in," she reported. "They're calling it up the line." A pause. "Now they're leaving, all 6 back to the lift." She let out a breath. "Your friend Reyes just saved our lives, and he doesn't even know why." "Tell him," Sarat said. "He earned the knowing." So Nadia told Reyes, in the human tongue, standing among the cargo in the dark, and Sarat watched the salvage boss's weathered face change as the words landed, watched him look up and around at the ceiling and the walls of the berth as though he could suddenly feel the rapt weight of the station pressing down on all of them, and watched him understand, the way his people seemed to understand things, all at once and without flinching, that the girl beside him could see the invisible knife at every throat on Osiri reach. 400, Reyes said in the trade tongue for Sarat's benefit, his gravel voice very quiet. In the concourse, over our heads. This whole time. 411, said Nadia, because she was nothing if not precise, and Reyes, to Sarat's lasting astonishment, laughed, a short, hard human bark with no fear in it at all, and said, "Then let's go count 'em out loud." The honest marshal's name was Warden Captain Ale Vantor, and she did not believe a word of it, and Sarat had known she wouldn't, and had picked her precisely because she wouldn't. Vantor was tall, narrow, gray-robed, one of the bureaucratic species that had governed the treaty ports for so long that pedantry had become a kind of honor with them. She ran the dockside wardens, a branch of the marshals that reported not to the station executive but sideways, to the treaty office, an old jurisdictional accident that had kept her people just clean enough to be useless to Daloon and just powerful enough to matter. All vouched for her. Reyes had crossed her twice on cargo disputes, and said she was a rule-bound pain in the hull who had never once lied to him, which from a salvage boss was the highest character reference Sarat had ever heard. She met them in a warden-holding office 2 levels below the concourse, off the record, at Al's request, and she stood with her long hands folded and listened to the entire thing with an expression of deepening bureaucratic offense. "You are telling me," Vantor said when Sarat had finished, "that this human contractor can perceive masking-grade concealed ordnance, through walls, that there are 400 such weapons in my concourse, and that the compliance office, the executive tier, and an unknown number of my own marshals are complicit in a plan to seize a treaty-neutral station by force." She let a silence stretch. "Surgeon, do you know what the penalty is for wasting a warden captain's shift with a delusion?" "I know what the penalty is for letting the station fall, because you would not test a delusion that took 1 minute to test," Sarat said. That landed, he watched it land. Vantor was rule-bound, which meant she was also, underneath the pedantry, terrified of being the officer on record for the disaster she failed to prevent. It was the one lever a bureaucrat could always be moved by, and Sarat pulled it without shame. "One test," he said. "You carry a warden's sidearm declared openly. Everyone in this room can see it. Now, do you carry anything you have not declared?" Vantor's long face did something complicated. "That is not a question you ask a warden captain." "I am not asking you," Sarat said. "I am asking her." He turned to Nadia, who had been sitting quietly against the wall with her eyes half closed, doing the thing she did, reading the room through the new organ behind her eyes. "Nadia, the warden captain. What does she carry?" Nadia opened her eyes. "Your sidearms on your right hip declared warm and open," she said to Vantor flatly. "You've got a second one, small. Charge slug feels like the officer's did. It's inside your left forearm along the bone under the robe, and it's wrapped proper masking good stuff, better than the cleaning techs get. And there's a third thing, and it's not a gun, it's flat and cold, and it's over your heart. And I don't know what it is, but you've kept it wrapped a long time, longer than the others. It feels older." The holding office went entirely silent. Warden Captain Ale Vantor did not move for a length of time that Sarat found difficult to endure. Then slowly, with the stiff dignity of a creature whose entire self-image had just been walked through, she reached under her left sleeve and drew out a compact charge slug weapon, wrapped in a masking sheath, and laid it on the table. And then, more slowly still, she reached into her robe over her narrow chest and drew out a flat wrapped object the size of a hand, old and worn at the edges, and set it beside the weapon, and Sarat saw that it was not ordnance at all. It was a memorial plate, an mourning token, the kind their species carried for a lost bondkin, wrapped in masking not to hide a weapon but to hide a grief, because an ith did not show such things, and a warden captain least of all. Nadia looked at the mourning token and understood what it was a half-second after everyone else, and Sarat watched her face, and to her lasting credit she did not name it, did not explain it, simply said quietly, "Sorry. It just felt cold. I didn't mean to." "You could not have known," Vantor said. Her voice had changed. Something bureaucratic had gone out of it and something older had come in. She picked up the mourning token and returned it to her robe with great care, and she looked at the small human against the wall for a long moment, and then she looked at Sarat and she said, "You have made a thing that can find the wrapped weapon on a warden captain and the wrapped grief on a warden captain and tell them apart. Do you understand what that is, surgeon? Do you understand what you have done?" "I am beginning to," Sarat said. "You have ended privacy," Vantor said. "For everyone. Forever. Not just for the syndicate, for all of us. Everything anyone has ever hidden, the weapon, the grief, the debt, the disease, the second gun and the old wound, she can feel it. And if she can, then in a year there will be 100 like her, and the galaxy that has been polite to itself for 4,000 years, because it could not see what its neighbor carried, will suddenly be able to see everything." She placed her wrapped sidearm back along her forearm with a warden's economy of motion. "I should have you both killed to keep it quiet. It would be the loyal thing, the treaty-serving thing." "But," said Nadia flatly from the wall. Vantor almost smiled. On an ith it was a small tightening at the corners of the jaw. "But," she agreed, "there are 411 wrapped weapons in my concourse, and if I am to choose between a galaxy that can see too much and a station that falls to House Vheim by tomorrow, I find that I am, after all, a warden first. Tell me what you need, surgeon. And tell me the truth about the cost, all of it, because I am done being lied to on my own docks." What they needed was a room full of witnesses who could not be bought, and a set of instruments that could not be locally altered, and a reason to gather both in the concourse before Deloon's chosen day. And it was Vantor, in the end, who found the reason, because a warden captain who has decided to move knows the machinery of a station, the way a surgeon knows a body. The reason was the rotation. Every treaty cycle, at the seam where the off-station auditors changed over, there was a formal handover in the concourse. A dull ceremonial thing. An accounting of the port passed from the outgoing neutral oversight to the incoming, conducted in the open under the daylight because the treaty's paranoid founders had insisted that the one moment the station's oversight was weakest must also be the one moment it was most publicly watched. Every block sent a witness. The treaty auditors attended in person, instruments live, feeds open to all 9 blocks off station. For 1 hour on that one day, the concourse held every honest eye in the sector and every sealed instrument the treaty possessed, all in one place, all watching, all recording where no local desk could reach the record. It was, Vantor observed dryly, the single worst hour in the entire cycle to try to seize a station, which was precisely why Deloon had chosen the day after it, when the outgoing auditors had gone and the incoming ones had not yet found their feet. "So we do not wait for her day," Sarat said slowly, understanding. "We move on the handover. We make the reveal happen in the 1 hour when every block is watching and every instrument is live and no desk on this station can bury the record." "The handover is in 2 days," Vantor said. "Can she do it? Stand in that concourse with the whole sector watching and name 400 wrapped weapons faster than the syndicate can decide to fire them? Because the moment she opens her mouth, surgeon, they will know the eye is in the room, and they will bring their day forward to that hour, and it will not be a hearing anymore. It will be the fight they have been preparing for 3 years, and it will happen around your patient, and she will be standing in the middle of it, pointing." Sarat looked at Nadia. Nadia had listened to all of it with her eyes half closed and her back against the warden's wall, and now she opened her eyes, and she did the arithmetic out loud, the way she did, flat and without drama, so that the plan stopped being a hope and became a measurement. 2 days, she said. Every wrapped weapon in the concourse, I already know where it is. I've walked that floor a dozen times now. It's mapped. It's in my head. It doesn't move much. The ones that matter are the fast ones, the ones on people, because a case in a ceiling can't shoot me, but a green-scaled enforcer with a wrapped piece can. So I don't name 400. I name the fast ones first, the ones on bodies, the ones that can hurt somebody in the next 10 seconds, and I name them in the order they're most likely to fire, and I keep naming them while your instruments confirm and your wardens move, and I don't stop, and I don't get it wrong, because the second I get one wrong they'll say I got all of it wrong. She paused. That's the job. I can do the job. The question isn't whether I can do it, Doctor. You already know I can do it. The question is whether your warden here has enough honest guns to move on the ones I point at before they move on me. Warden Captain Vantor looked at the small human for a long moment, and Sarat saw the last of the ith's disbelief burn off, and something harder settle in its place. I have 40 wardens I would trust with my morning token, she said, against 400 wrapped weapons and an executive tier that wants you dead. 40's enough, said Reyes from the doorway where he had been leaning and listening the whole time with his arms folded and his gravel patience. 40 of yours and 40 of mine. He unfolded his arms. You bring the badges, Captain. We'll bring the deathworlders. Somebody hangs an army over my crew's heads for 3 years. They can damn well answer for it in the daylight. Ussar DeLune found the I's name on the second-to-last page of a seized clinic file, and she was almost disappointed by how ordinary it was. The compliance sweep had done its work. The graft program's records lay open on her desk in the daylight suite, and DeLune read them the way she read everything, slowly, completely, without skipping. Most of it was a surgeon's dry self-congratulation, a Meshari named Sarat Vone documenting a sensory graft with the breathless care of a man who thought he was building the future of medicine. DeLune had no interest in the future of medicine. She read for the one thing that mattered, and she found it in the patient log, a single subject taken to full graft 4 weeks prior, a human, a salvage hand off the outer docks, deaf from a decompression injury. Name, Nadia Cole. DeLune set the file down and looked out through the glass wall at the bright concourse far below, where 1,000 people moved under the amber daylight, where 411 of her wrapped weapons hung in the ceilings and rode the hips of her invisible army. And she thought about the fact that a single small deaf human somewhere in that crowd could feel every one of them. She did not rage. Rage was for people who had lost. DeLune had not lost. She had merely acquired a problem, and problems were solved by applying the correct force to the correct point. And the correct point, clearly, was one small human who had to be closed before she could open her mouth in front of a witness who mattered. But DeLune was careful, and careful people asked the second question, and the second question was, how did a surgeon's failed hearing patient become an eye that could see masking-grade concealment? The file did not say. The file said the graft was designed to perceive ambient field, a navigation sense, a compensation for lost sound. There was nothing in it about weapons. The surgeon himself, judging by his notes, had not intended it, which meant the eye was an accident. Which meant DeLune felt the elegant cold pleasure of a mind arriving at a true thing, that it was not the surgeon's science that was dangerous. It was the human. Any human. A human nervous system handed a new sense, had taken a gentle navigation graft and, without being asked, turned it into a weapon detector, because that was apparently what a human did with any new capacity you were foolish enough to give it. It found the threat first, reflexively, the way a scorched world predator's every organ pointed at the nearest danger. The surgeon had grown an eye for feeling walls. The human had grown, out of the same tissue, an eye for feeling the knife behind the wall, and had done it in her sleep in 3 days without instruction, because that was simply what her kind was for. DeLune understood then that she was not dealing with a clever accident that could be closed and forgotten. She was dealing with a demonstration. If this human could do it, every human could, given the graft, and now the graft existed, and the surgeon existed, and both were loose on her station. And the moment either surfaced in front of the treaty blocks, the whole galaxy would learn that its 4,000-year architecture of polite concealment could be undone by handing a deathworlder a new nerve. She could not unknow it. She could not let the blocks know it. She could only move faster than the knowledge, take the station before the eye could open, and make the human and the surgeon into a tragic footnote. Two bodies lost in the confusion of a legitimate security action, record sealed, inquiry buried under the accomplished fact of a station that already belonged to House V. Heim. DeLune brought her day forward again, not to the handover before it. She would not give the eye the stage. She would take the station the morning of the handover, in the last quiet hour before the witnesses gathered, and present the arriving auditors with a station already changed hands, a fait accompli under the daylight. And by the time anyone thought to ask about a deaf human contractor, there would be no deaf human contractor to ask about. She gave the order to find Nadia Cole. She gave it gently, the way she gave all her orders, and it went down the ladder rung by rung, and the ladder began, methodically, to take her station apart looking for one small human in it. They came for all first, because all had a name and a desk and could not disappear into a human birth, and they took him quietly, the way they took everything, and the first Sarat knew of it was that the auditor stopped answering. "His channel's dead," Nadia said. They were in a warden-safe berth. Vantor had found them, a disused customs annex below the concourse, and Nadia sat with her back to the wall and her eyes closed, not because she could feel all from here. He was too far, wrapped in whatever they'd wrapped him in, but because closing her eyes was the only rest the weight allowed her now. He was supposed to check in at shift change. He didn't. His channel's been dead 4 hours. "They have him," Vantor said. She had come down herself, gray-robed and grim, and she did not soften it, which Sarat had come to respect in her. "If they have all, they have the auditor who filed the case finding. They will make him recant it, coercion, a forged correction. It does not matter how, only that the one filed record we had is now compromised. And they will have asked him questions." She looked at Sarat. "He knows this birth, he knows the plan, he knows her name." "He won't tell them her name," Sarat said, and then heard the hope in it and hated it because hope was not a plan. "He is a cephalopod bureaucrat who has already lost more courage than his species issues in a lifetime just by coming down here," Vantor said, not unkindly. "He will tell them everything and no one will blame him, and it will not matter whether he tells them because they already know her name. They seized your clinic, surgeon. They have your patient log. They have known she is Nadia Cole for a day at least." She let that sit. "The only thing all gives them is this room, and the plan, and how little time we have. Which means we have even less than that." Sarat looked at Nadia. She had opened her eyes. "How long?" he said, her word. Nadia was quiet for a moment, doing an arithmetic that was not about weapons this time. "They're not going to wait for the handover," she said slowly. "If they know it's me, and they know we're going to stand up at the handover, then the handover's the last thing they want. That's the room full of witnesses. So they don't let it happen. They move before it. They take the station in the quiet hour before the auditors show, present everybody with a done deal, and by the time the witnesses walk and it's over." She looked at Sarat, and for the first time since he had known her, he saw something in her flat human calm that was not calm, not fear exactly, but the specific weight of a person who has just watched their one plan turn to sand. "The handover was our stage, doctor, and they just took the stage away. If they move first, there's no room full of honest instruments. There's just a coup in the quiet and me somewhere in a crowd being hunted, and no one watching who'd believe me." The customs annex was silent. Far above them, through 2 decks of station, the amber daylight lay across the concourse, where 411 wrapped weapons waited for a signal that had just moved up to sometime in the next day. Then Reyes, who had been sitting on a supply crate cleaning grease from under his nails with a folding tool, spoke without looking up. So don't wait for their stage or ours, the salvage boss said. Make your own. He closed the tool and pocketed it and finally looked up, and his weathered face was doing the thing Sarah had seen in the birth, the all-at-once human understanding. They want the quiet hour. They want nobody watching. So the play's real simple, Captain. We don't let it be quiet and we don't let there be nobody watching. He nodded at Nadia. She can't out-hide 400 guns, but she doesn't have to hide. She just has to make sure that the second those guns come out, the whole sector's already looking at them. You've got treaty feeds. You've got 9 blocks off station who'd cross the sector to stop House Vheim owning this port. So we don't wait for the witnesses to come to the concourse. We open the feed ourselves, and we bring the concourse to the witnesses, and we do it before Deloon's quiet hour, so that, when she reaches for her station, there's already a live channel showing every block in the sector exactly what she's reaching for. Vantor stared at him. You are proposing to seize the treaty broadcast. That is a capital violation of 9 separate. I'm proposing, Reyes said, to point a camera at a crime. You want to arrest me for it after, Captain. You know where the human birth is. He jerked his chin at Nadia. She points. Your instruments confirm. And the whole galaxy watches it happen live before Deloon's ready in the daylight she was counting on to hide in. That's the stage. It was always going to be the concourse. The only question was who picked the hour. He stood up off the crate. So let's pick it. Let's pick it now tonight before they pick it for us. Let's make Deloon fight her war a day early, in front of everybody, against the one person in the sector who already knows where all her guns are. Nadia looked at the salvage boss for a long moment, and then she looked at Sarat, and Sarat watched the sand turn back into a plan behind her flat human eyes. He's right, she said. They took our stage, so we take the hour. She stood up off the wall and rolled her shoulders, and the graft line at her neck caught the annex light in a thin silver seam. Tell me when. I already know where everything is. I've known for days. All I've been waiting for is a reason to say it out loud where somebody's listening. They went up into the daylight at the changing of the 3rd shift, when the concourse was full, because a plan built on being seen does not hide, and Sarat found that the hardest thing he had ever done was walk into the open beside a girl he had marked for death, and not run. The concourse lay under the amber light as it always did, bright, vaulting, indifferent, 1,000 species moving through it on 1,000 errands, and Sarat felt the rapt weight of it now the way Nadia must always feel it. Though he could feel nothing, he simply knew, and the knowing was almost as bad. Somewhere above them in the clear glass ceiling hung the cases she had described, the armory racks and the dock struts, cold and patient. Somewhere in the crowd moved the green-scaled enforcers with their wrapped hips. Somewhere on the noble tier, behind a glass wall, a slate-skinned woman was moving up a clock. And in the center of it all walked one small deaf human, unhurried, reading a room no one else could read, with a surgeon on one side and a warden captain a careful distance behind, and 40 salvage hands scattered through the crowd pretending to be cargo crews on a shift break. Reyes had the feed. That was the piece that made it possible, and it was pure human improvisation, the thing Sarat would later try and fail to explain to his own cast. The treaty broadcast was locked. The syndicate held the station's official channels. But the human crews ran their own comms, cheap, independent, deep space salvage rigs that punched signal through hard vacuum to reach wrecks no station relay covered. And those rigs did not answer to Ossery Reach, or to House Vheim, or to anyone but the crews that owned them. Reyes had spent the night with 3 of his comms hands splicing a salvage rig into the concourse's own public monitors, and slaving the whole thing to a deep space burst that would throw the feed, unfiltered, to every relay in the sector and every block listening on the other end. It was crude. It was illegal 9 ways. It was, Vantor had admitted with something like awe, completely outside anything the syndicate had planned to defend against, because who defends a treaty port against a garbage hauler's radio? When you're ready, Reyes said in Sarat's ear on the human channel. Feed's cold, but it's live the second I flip it. You flip it, Every block in the sector's watching this floor. No take-backs, Doc. She starts pointing, she doesn't get to stop. Sarah looked at Nadia. She was never going to stop, he said. Nadia had stopped walking. She stood near the center of the concourse, by the low rail that ringed the transit gates, in the brightest part of the daylight, and she had her eyes open and her head slightly tipped, and her whole small body still in the way Sarah had learned meant she was reading everything at once. Around her the crowd flowed and paid her no attention, a scarred human contractor at a rail, unremarkable small. The last thing on Osiri reach anyone would look at twice. "They're moving," she said quietly. "The enforcers, there's more of them than there were. They came up in the last hour, a lot of them spread through the floor, wrapped slow." A pause. "Delune's not waiting for morning." She moved it up again. "This is the quiet hour, Doctor, this is it. They're getting into position to take the floor. Another few minutes and they'll have the gates and the arches and every choke on this level, and then the signal goes and then it's done." "Then we do not have a few minutes," Sarah said. "No," said Nadia. "We have now." She turned her head, found him with eyes that could not see him, fixed him anyway with the flat certainty that had stopped his hand 3 days and a lifetime ago. "Tell Reyes to flip it." Sarah opened his mouth to say it and found that his voice had gone, and so he simply lifted one of his 4 hands and made the human gesture Reyes had taught him, thumb raised, and 40 paces away a salvage boss at a monitor bank flipped a switch, and the public screens of the Osiri Reach concourse, the arrival boards, the transit displays, the great advertising panels under the daylight, all went at once to a single live image of a small human woman standing at a rail. And then the salvage rig punched that image out through hard vacuum to every relay in the sector, and 9 blocks worth of off-station witnesses, who had gathered their instruments and credentials for a dull ceremonial handover the next morning, found their feeds lighting up a day early with a broadcast from the concourse floor, and leaned in and began to watch. Usar Delune saw the screens change from her glass wall on the noble tier, and for the first time in 3 years, something in her elegant certainty cracked. She had built for every threat. She had bought the compliance office and the marshals and half the executive tier. She had wrapped 411 weapons so perfectly that no instrument in the sector could find them. She had moved her clock twice to outrun a surgeon and an accident. She had planned for the treaty blocks and the auditors and the paranoid machinery of the handover. She had not planned for a garbage hauler to seize her station's own screens and point them at a deaf human, because it had not occurred to her, in the whole of her long, careful life, that anyone would fight her with a salvage radio and a woman who could not hear. Down on the floor, the human was speaking. Delune could not hear the words from the tier, but the concourse screens carried them, subtitled in the trade tongue for the feed, and Delune read them off her own station's displays with the specific horror of a person watching their invisible thing become visible. The human was not shouting. That was the part Delune would remember in the time she had left to remember anything. The human was not accusing, not raging, not pleading to the crowd. She was reading a list. She stood at the rail in the daylight, small and scarred and entirely calm, and she named the first weapon. Green-scaled male, transit gate 4 right side, wrapped charge slug on the hip, hot, safety off. A beat. Auditor, look at gate 4. And on the treaty channel, which the salvage rig had spliced open alongside the public feed, an instrument that could not be locally altered swung toward transit gate 4 and swept it, and where the Arch's own record showed a green-scaled laborer carrying nothing at all, the treaty auditor's sealed reading, thrown live to 9 blocks, showed a masking-grade concealed weapon, hot, safety off, exactly where the human had said. Delune watched the number appear on 9 blocks feeds at once. 1. One wrapped weapon, found by a human's word and confirmed by an instrument no house could reach, broadcast live across the sector before her quiet hour had even finished. She understood, with the cold clarity she had always been proud of, that it would not be 1. It would be 411, one after another, faster than she could decide anything, and every one of them confirmed live, and there was no longer any version of the morning in which House Vheim quietly owned Ossuary Reach. There was only the version in which the whole sector watched, in real time, an army that could not exist be counted out of the daylight by a creature that should not have been able to see it. Delune had one move left, and it was the worst one, and she knew it was the worst one, and she made it anyway, because a careful person cornered will still reach for the only lever left even when the lever is the one that ends her. She gave the signal to fire. If the Eye was going to count her army out of the daylight, then the army would come out of the daylight now, all at once, before the human could finish the list. 400 wrapped weapons bared in a single breath across the concourse. The coup begun in the open, the floor taken by force in front of the feed, betting everything on speed, on the shock of it, on 400 guns coming out faster than 40 wardens and 40 salvage hands could answer. It was a good bet against anyone else. It was the bet the whole galaxy would have made. 400 to 80 was not a fight. It was a foregone conclusion, and Delune took what comfort she could in the arithmetic as she gave the order that turned her invisible garrison visible. She had simply forgotten the one thing that Sarat had understood 3 days ago in a maintenance corridor, and that Vantor had understood in a holding office, and that Reyes had understood in the dark of the human birth, and that Nadia Cole had understood before any of them, standing at a rail in the daylight with a list already finished in her head. The 400 guns were only an advantage while they were hidden. The moment they came out, they were just 400 targets in a room where one small human already knew exactly where every single one of them was. Nadia felt the signal go before any weapon moved, because a wrapped weapon coming awake was not silent to her. It was a change in temperature, 400 cold weights warming at once as safeties came off and hands closed, and the whole invisible army woke in a single breath. "They're firing," she said flat into the human channel, and then without a pause, without a rise in her voice, without 1 degree of heat. "Reyes, left of the T-stand, green-scaled, coming up with a long one. That's the first, take him." She did not shout it. That was what went out on the feed to 9 blocks, to the whole watching sector. Not a scream, not a battle cry, just a small deaf woman at a rail reading positions in the cadence of a dock hand calling weights, while around her the brightest space in the sector came apart. The concourse erupted. 400 wrapped weapons tore free of their masking in a heartbeat, and for one instant the crowd saw what it had been walking past for 3 years. Green-scaled enforcers rising out of the labor cast with battle-length weapons, cases splitting open behind the customs arch, the racks in the dock struts swinging down on servo mounts into the daylight. Panic went through the concourse like a pressure wave. 1,000 civilians of 9 species broke and ran and screamed, and the syndicate's plan had counted on exactly that, on the shock, on the chaos covering the speed of the take. The chaos covered nothing. Nadia was already ahead of it. Second 1, Transit Gate 2, cephalopod brokers, not a broker, wrapped piece coming up under the pressure suit, Vantor, your side now. Beat. Third, above you, dock strut, that rack's live and it's traversing. Get your people off the east rail before it. And she named it. And Vantor's wardens were already moving because they had learned in 2 days to move on her word without waiting to understand it. And the rack and the strut fired into the space where 40 wardens had been standing a breath before and were no longer, because a small human had told them to move before the gun that no one could see had finished turning toward them. Sarat stood at her shoulder and did the only thing he could do, which was relay, his 4 hands on the channel splits, throwing her words to the wardens and the humans in the same instant she spoke them. And he understood, watching her, listening to her, feeling the fight happen around a still point that was her, that he was witnessing something the galaxy had never seen and would never be able to unsee. He was watching a battle in which one side could not be surprised. Every ambush the syndicate had built into the concourse, every crossfire, every wrapped weapon placed just so to catch a defender from behind, All of it depended on the defender not knowing it was there, and the defender knew. She knew all of it. She had known for days. The syndicate was fighting a room they had spent 3 years booby-trapping, against an enemy who could read every trap in the dark. Enforcer behind the credit arch, he's flanking your humans, Ray's. He thinks he's hidden, Nadia said, and Ray's crew took the flanker before he cleared the arch, and Sarah heard the salvage boss's gravel voice come back on the channel, not laughing now but steady, saying only next, and Nadia said, next is the pair at the customs holding. They're opening the big case, the coffin, that's 40 long ones. Vantor, you cannot let that case finish opening. And the warden captain and a wedge of her people were already driving for the customs arch through the breaking crowd. It was not clean. Sarah wanted that remembered too, afterward, by everyone who told the story as though it had been. People died on that floor. Wardens Nadia named a threat-detector did not always reach it in time. A salvage-hand named Ochoa went down at the east rail and did not get up. The syndicate's enforcers were soldiers, real ones, and being seen did not make them harmless, only findable. For every weapon Nadia called and the honest hands answered, there was a cost, and the cost was paid in the daylight, live, in front of 9 blocks, and Sarah felt each one land on the girl beside him because he could see what it did to her face even as her voice never changed. That was the thing he could not get over in the moment or ever after. Her voice never changed. She called the positions of the weapons that killed people she had met, in the same flat measured cadence she had used to name the knife behind the maintenance wall, and she did not get angry, and she did not break, and she did not stop, because she had understood before any of them that the only thing that could beat 400 guns was to keep naming them faster than they could fire, and that the instant she let the grief or the fear or the rage into her voice she would slow down, and the instant she slowed down, people she had not yet saved would die. So she stayed cold. She stayed cold on purpose, as a discipline, as the hardest and most deliberate thing Sarah had ever watched a person do, and she counted the army out of the daylight one weapon at a time while it tried to kill her. Raise on your 6 low green-scaled, wrapped blade, not a gun, he's close. Got him. Vantor, the case is open. They've got 2 of the long ones up, left of the arch. They're bringing them to bear on the transit gates where the civilians are bunched. Moving. Faster. And then, in the middle of it, a green-scaled enforcer that Nadia had not yet named, because there were 400 of them and she was one person, and even she could only speak so fast, came up out of the panicking crowd not 10 paces from the rail, from the one direction the wardens had thinned to answer the customs case, with a wrapped weapon already leveled at the small human who was costing house behind its station, and for the length of one breath the plan's whole flaw stood revealed. She could see every weapon in the room, but she could not answer them. She had no gun. She was a sensor and a voice and a still point, and a sensor cannot stop a slug already in the air. Sarat saw it. He was Meshari, gentle and clever and never first, and he had 4 hands and no weapon and no training and no instinct for this, and he did the only thing a healer's body knew how to do, which was to put itself between the harm and the patient, and he moved. He was too slow. Of course he was too slow, he was a surgeon. Ray's was not too slow. The salvage boss had been drifting toward Nadia's blind side for a full minute, because Ray's had understood the flaw in the plan before Sarat had understood it the way his people understood things, all at once and without being told, and had appointed himself to the one job the censor could not do. And when the unnamed enforcer rose out of the crowd, Ray's was already there, already moving. And he took the enforcer off his feet with the flat, brutal economy of a man who stripped hulls for a living and had no illusions about what bodies were, and the wrapped weapon fired into the glass ceiling, and a long crack ran up through the daylight, and the enforcer did not get up, and Ray's rolled to his feet already scanning for the next one, and said, into the channel, in his gravel voice, without heat, the same thing Sarah had heard him say all through the fight. Next. Next, Nadia agreed and named it, and the counting went on. The worst moment of the count was not a weapon. It was a choice, and it came at her fast, and Sarah watched it land on the girl and never leave. Two threats woke in the same breath, far apart on the floor, and both of them were about to fire, and there was only one of her. On the west side, a dock strut rack finished traversing onto a knot of civilians pinned against a shuttered kiosk, 9 species, 40 bodies, nowhere to run. On the east side, a green-scaled enforcer came up behind Vantor's own line with a wrapped long piece leveled at the warden captain's unguarded back. And Vantor did not know he was there, and could not know, because he was wrapped and she was busy, and the whole point of him was that no one would see him until it was too late. 2 names, 1 voice, and whichever name Nadia said first, the other threat got the extra breath it needed to fire. Sarah felt her understand it. He was close enough to see her face, and he saw the arithmetic hit her, saw her weigh 40 strangers against 1 warden she had come to trust, saw the impossible sum of it flood through her in the quarter-second she had before both weapons spoke, and he braced for her to freeze, because a decent person freezes, because that is what the choice is designed to do, because there is no right answer, and the not answering is a kind of mercy you grant yourself when the sum will not come out. She did not freeze, she did the sum. Raise west the rack, 40 civilians, it's live and traversing, you have to physically pull them clear. There's no time to reach the rack, she said, and in the same breath, without a pause, without drawing air between the two, core east behind Vantor, green-scaled, wrapped long piece 3 paces, he's about to fire on the captain's back, take him now. And it was the only word she raised in the whole count, that one now. And she raised it not in anger, but in the flat, hard imperative of a dock hand calling a fault before the hull tears. And both her calls went out in the same instant to 2 different people 40 paces apart. And both those people moved on her word without understanding it. And Sarah watched a small deaf human split 1 voice across an impossible choice, and by refusing to freeze, refused to make it a choice at all. It nearly worked. It nearly worked completely, which was somehow worse than if it had failed clean. Core reached the enforcer behind Vantor in time. The demolition's warden had no weapon and did not need one. He simply took the green-scaled soldier off his aim with his whole heavy body, and the wrapped long piece fired wide into the deck, and Vantor spun, understood in a glance what had almost happened to her back, and did not have time to be afraid because there was no time on that floor for anything but the next name. On the west side, Rays and 3 salvage hands hit the knot of pinned civilians like a boarding crew and drove them bodily off the kiosk wall a breath before the dock strut rack opened up, and the rack's fire went through the space where 40 people had been standing and into the shuttered kiosk behind them, and 40 strangers of 9 species lived because 4 humans had thrown them to the ground on the word of a woman none of them would ever meet. But the rack had fired, and a rack that fires puts a great deal into the air, and not all of it went into the kiosk. A young ith who had been at the edge of the knot, 1 pace slower than Rays could reach, did not get thrown clear in time. Sarah saw it happen. Nadia could not see it happen, but she felt it. Felt the warm, open weight of a living person on the west side of the floor go cold and still in the exact place she had sent Rays to save. And Sarah watched her flinch, the small, hard flinch he had seen only twice, and he watched her not stop, because stopping would cost the next one, and he understood that this was the true price of the eye, the one the papers would never record, that she felt them go out, every single one. Warm and open 1 second, cold and still the next, and she felt the change through the organ he had grown, more surely than sight, more surely than sound. The precise moment a person she had tried to save stopped being a person and became a weight. And she carried each of those the way she carried everything, without a word, and named the next threat, and kept counting, because she was the only one who could, and looking away was the one thing she would not do even when it was the only mercy left. Next, she said. Her voice did not change. Only Sarah, who had learned to read her, heard the thing that had gone into it and would not come out. Next, he answered, because she needed someone to, and he threw her word to the wardens, and the count went on. The syndicate's army broke not because it was outgunned, but because it could not bear to be seen. Sarat worked this out slowly, over the long minutes of the count, and it was the second great thing he learned that day about the difference between his galaxy and the creature who was unmaking it. The green-scaled enforcers were soldiers, and brave enough, and they had 400 weapons against 80. By every arithmetic they should have held the floor. But they had been built, every one of them, around a single principle, that they were invisible, that they moved unseen, that the whole terror of them was that you never knew they were there until the wrapped edge was already at your throat. That was their doctrine and their training and their courage. And a small deaf human at a rail had taken it away from them, all of it in the space of 2 minutes, by the simple act of naming them out loud, one after another correctly, on a channel the whole sector was watching. An enforcer who has spent 3 years being furniture does not know how to fight in the daylight with his face on 9 blocks feeds. The moment Nadia named him, he was not an invisible knife anymore. He was a green-scaled male at Transit Gate 4 with a slug piece and a name and a sector full of witnesses, and everything that had made him dangerous, the not being there, was gone, stripped off him like the masking wrap, and what was left underneath was a frightened soldier in a bad position who had just watched his invisibility, the thing he had bet his life on, evaporate in real time. They began to drop the weapons, not all at once. The first few Nadia named fought and some died, and the cost of them was real. But as the count went on, as it became clear to every wrapped soldier on the floor that the human was not going to miss, that there was no shadow left to step back into, that the next name out of her flat mouth might be his, and the instant she said it his weapon would be found and confirmed and answered, the doctrine cracked. An enforcer near the creditarch simply set his long weapon on the floor and raised his empty hands, and Nadia felt it and said, "That one's down, Vantor. Leave him, he's out." And it spread from there the way the panic had spread through the civilians, except this was the opposite of panic. This was the cold contagion of soldiers understanding all at once that the war was already lost, because the one thing it had been built on had never really existed. "They're putting them down," Nadia reported. Her voice had not changed. "West side whole cluster, they're setting them down. The racks and the struts are still live, but there's nobody left to crew them." A pause. "It's slowing down, Doctor, it's slowing down." And the marshals turned. That was Vantor's doing, and it was the coldest, most bureaucratic, most necessary act of the whole day. The marshals in Deloon's pocket had been holding the choke points, waiting for the floor to be taken so they could seal the docks and make the coup a fact. But the floor was not being taken. The floor was being counted, on a live feed, to 9 blocks, and a marshal who seals the docks on that feed is not a loyal officer. He is a traitor with his face on record across the sector. Vantor got on the marshal channel, her old jurisdictional accident, the sideways authority that had kept her clean, and she did not plead and she did not threaten. She simply read them the arithmetic in her pedantic gray voice, the way she read everything. "This is Warden Captain Vantor. The concourse is on open treaty broadcast to all 9 blocks. Every action taken on this floor from this moment is on the permanent record. You may hold your posts for House Vheim, in which case you will be identified by name, by 9 blocks, as participants in an armed seizure of a treaty-neutral station, which carries the sanction it carries. Or you may stand down and assist the lawful defense, in which case the record will show that you did. You have the length of this transmission to decide." I would decide quickly. The record is already recording. It was not a rousing speech. It moved no one's heart. It simply presented every corrupt marshal on the floor with the same arithmetic the enforcers were doing, and marshals, being bureaucrats rather than soldiers, did the arithmetic even faster, and the choke points came open one by one as officers who had sold themselves to Deloon calculated correctly that a sold career was worth more alive and unsanctioned than dead for a coup that was visibly failing on the very feed that would convict them. It was not honor. Vantor did not pretend it was honor. It was the machinery of a treaty port turning at last, against the thing that had corrupted it, because the machinery had been shown its own reflection in front of witnesses and could not bear the look of itself. The count wound down. The floor, which had been a battle, became a slow, grim business of wardens and salvage hands moving through the settling panic, gathering weapons Nadia named, securing enforcers Nadia said were down, and the civilians who had run were pressed against the far walls of the concourse in their 9 species, watching, and above them all the great cracked pane of daylight let the amber light of the gas giant pour down onto a floor where the invisible army of Osiri Reach lay counted and bared and finished in the open. On the record forever. Seret allowed himself, for the first time in an hour, to believe they had won. That was when Nadia went rigid. He knew her stillness by now, the reading stillness, the settled attention. This was not that. This was a different thing entirely, a whole-body lock, her head coming up, her breath stopping, and when she spoke her voice was still flat but it had gone very fast, the words coming out pressed together. There's a cold thing on the noble tier, and it just woke up and it's bigger than anything on this floor. It's not a gun. It's the biggest cold weight I've ever felt. It's above us. It's in the tier structure. It's doctor. It's the whole tier. Somebody just armed something built into the whole tier and it's counting and I can feel it counting. Seret's heart went cold. He understood before she finished what Delune had reached for. A demolition charge. Masking grade, built into the structure of the noble tier over 3 years the way the weapons had been built into the ceilings. The syndicate's last insurance. Not to take the station but to deny it. To bring the whole concourse and the tier and the evidence and the eye and everyone on the floor down into the station's core if the take failed. So that House Vheim's role would go down with it into rubble and no record and no eye and no proof. Only a tragedy. Only an accident. Only a station that had suffered a catastrophic structural failure during a chaotic and regrettable disturbance of unknown origin. Delune could not own Osiri Reach. So she would erase the hour instead, and take her secret and the girl who had exposed it down together into the dark where no block could read them. Vantor, Seret said, and his voice came out steady, which astonished him. The noble tier. There is a charge in the tier structure, masking grade. It is armed and it is on account. Nadia can feel it. She is the only one who can feel it. You have to get to it and she has to guide you and there is very little time. Vantor did not waste a word asking how a human could feel a charge built into a wall. She had stopped asking that kind of question in the holding office 2 days ago. Where was all she said? Nadia was already moving off the rail, toward the tier access, faster than Seret had ever seen her move, and he ran after her, and Vantor's wardens converged, and the small deaf human led them up into the noble tier of Osiri Reach with her hand out in front of her and her head tipped, and her voice coming fast and flat, following the count of a cold weight only she could feel, toward the one hidden weapon in the whole station that had been built not to take a life, but to take them all. The noble tier was quiet in a way the concourse had never been. White stone and cool air and the amber daylight lying long across the floors, and Nadia went through it at a dead run with her hand out in front of her, following a cold count no instrument in the sector could hear. Left, she said. It's behind the wall in the structure. It's not a room, it's inside the tier itself, this whole section. The charge is threaded through the whole section. She stopped at a blank stretch of white stone between 2 reception suites and put her palm flat against it, and Seret saw her flinch, actually flinch, the first time he had seen the weight cause her pain rather than simply pressure. Here. It's densest here. This is the heart of it. Whatever's counting, it's behind this wall and it's close, doctor, the count's getting fast. Vantor's demolitions warden, a heavy-set ith named Kor who carried tools instead of a weapon, was already at the wall, and he did not question how the human knew, because the whole tier around them was going to come down if he wasted the breath. He opened the stone, Behind it, in the structural void that ran through the noble tier like a vein, was the thing Nadia had felt. A mass of masking-wrapped charge threaded along the load-bearing spine of the section, patient, invisible, built in over 3 years the way everything of Delune's had been built in. And at its heart, a small cold device counting down toward the moment it would take the concourse and the tier, and every soul on both into the station's core. Kor looked at it for 1 second, and Sarat watched the demolition's warden make the same calculation Nadia had already made. And it was not the calculation of a man who thinks he can defuse a masking-grade device built by an enemy over 3 years. It was the calculation of a man deciding how to get it away from people before it fired. "Can't safe it in time," Kor said. "Not this, but the tier vents to a cargo lock 40 paces service side. If we can move the core, just the core, the trigger, not the whole spread, the rest is inert without it." He was already reaching in, following the wrapped mass with his hands where his instruments were blind. "I need to find the core. It's wrapped. My sweep shows nothing. It's all nothing." He looked up, and for the first time the pedantic bureaucracy was entirely gone from a warden's face, replaced by naked need. "Human, I cannot find the core. You can. Put my hand on it." And Nadia Cole, who could not see the wall or the void or the warden's hand, reached in past Kor's arm into the mass of invisible death, and closed her small scarred fingers around his, and moved his hand through the wrapped spread of the charge to the one cold, dense point at the center of it, the trigger, the heart, the count, and said, "There. That's it. That's the one that's counting. Everything else is just noise around it. That's the only part that matters." Kor took the core in both hands, and Nadia guided him, not the device, the man, her hand over his the whole way back out of the wall and down the service corridor at a run, 40 paces to the cargo lock, and Sarat ran with them and could do nothing but run. And behind them the inert spread of the charge hung dead in the wall because the one part that mattered was in Kor's hands, and Nadia's voice never stopped, flat and fast, counting the countdown out loud so the warden would know how long he had. Still counting, you've got time, next door, the lock's here, it's right here." And Kor reached the cargo lock and put the core into it and sealed the inner door and cycled the outer. And the station spat the heart of Usar Delune's last hidden weapon out into the hard vacuum and the amber daylight, where it finished its count alone, a small silent flare against the great curve of the gas giant, and harmed nothing at all. The corridor was very quiet. Kor sat down on the deck with his back against the lock and did not speak. Nadia stood over him, her hand still half raised, her head still tipped toward a wall that no longer held anything cold, and Sarat watched her slowly understand that it was over, that the last weight was gone, that for the first time in an hour there was nothing in the station trying to kill anyone. "It's out," she said to no one. "It's gone, there's nothing left counting." "No," Sarat said. "There is nothing left counting." She turned her blind eyes toward his voice, and something in her flat human calm finally, slightly, cracked, not into tears, not into rage, but into the simple bottomless exhaustion of a person who has held herself cold on purpose for an hour past the point where anybody should be able to. And Sarat crossed the corridor and put 2 of his 4 hands on her shoulders. Gently, the way a healer holds a patient who has survived something they should not have, and she let him. And neither of them said anything, because there was nothing that needed saying that the silence did not already hold. They found Delune in her daylight suite, and she did not run, because Delune was not the kind of creature that ran. She was standing at her glass wall when the wardens came through the door, looking down at the concourse where her invisible army lay counted and bared in the amber light, and she did not turn at once. She let them come to her. She was elegant even then, slate-skinned and unhurried, a noble of an inner house facing the wreck of 3 years and a fortune and a plan that should have worked, that would have worked, against anyone in the galaxy except the small deaf creature who now stood between 2 wardens in the doorway of her suite. "So you are the eye," Delune said. She turned, finally, and looked at Nadia with something that was almost courtesy. I confess I expected something more, a device, a construct, some new instrument the treaty office had been hiding from us. Not, she let her gaze move over the small scarred human, the clinic grease still on one cheekbone, the graft-lined silver at her neck. A salvage hand a surgeon happened to repair. Do you even understand what you have done, girl? Do you understand what you have ended? Not my station. My station is nothing. You have ended the wrapped thing. Every treaty, every border, every quiet arrangement, that 4,000 years of civilization, built on the simple grace that a hidden thing stays hidden. You have ended all of it. And you did it by accident in 3 days, because a doctor was careless with what he gave you. I understand it fine, Nadia said, flat, unmoved. You built an army you thought nobody could see, and you hung it over 100,000 people's heads for 3 years, and you were going to use it. And then somebody could see it. That's the whole story. You can dress it up about civilization if you want. It doesn't change the part where you had 400 guns and I counted them. DeLune's composure flickered, the same crack Sarah had seen when the screens changed, the specific horror of the invisible made visible. And then she did the thing Sarah had been dreading since they came through the door, the last hidden card of a creature who had built her whole life on hidden things. Her slate-gray hand moved, smooth and unhurried, toward a fold of her elegant robe, toward the small wrapped weight Sarah had not known was there, and could not have known, because it was masking grade, because it was invisible, because it was the one gun Ussar DeLune had kept closest of all. Nadia had named it before DeLune's hand finished moving. Wrapped piece inside her right sleeve along the forearm, she's reaching for it now, Nadia said, in the exact flat cadence she had used for 400 others, not fast, not loud, simply reading the last weapon in the room the way she had read the first. And Vantor's wardens took DeLune's arms before the noble's hand reached the weapon that had never, for one instant, been hidden from the small deaf human it was meant for. DeLune did not struggle. She looked at Nadia across the daylight suite, held between 2 wardens, her last invisible thing named and taken like all the rest, and Sarah watched the whole architecture of her certainty go out of her at once, watched her understand in a single silent moment that there had never been any hidden card, not from the beginning, not the maintenance corridor or the customs case or the tier charge or the gun in her own sleeve. That a creature who could see the wrapped had been 3 days ahead of her the entire time, and she had only just now caught up to how thoroughly she had already lost. You cannot put it back, DeLune said. It was not a threat. It was almost a plea, the first honest thing she had said. Whatever happens to me, whatever happens to my house. You cannot put the wrapped thing back. The galaxy has seen what she can do on 9 blocks feeds in the daylight. By tomorrow, every power in the sector will want the graft. By the year's end, there will be 100 like her, then 1,000, and no one will ever be able to hide anything from anyone again. You think you have saved this station. You have burned down the only thing that kept us all polite. Maybe, said Nadia Cole, unbothered, already turning to go, already tired in a way that had nothing to do with the noble or the station or the galaxy. Or maybe the thing that kept everybody polite was never the hiding. Maybe it was just that nobody'd been caught yet. She stopped in the doorway and did not look back because she could not, but she tipped her head the way she did when she was reading the room, and Sarah understood that she was, one last time, feeling the shape of the woman behind her. You're not scared of everybody being able to see, lady. You're scared of everybody being able to see you. They found all alive, which Sarah had not let himself expect, in a sealed compliance holding 2 levels under the concourse. And it was Nadia who found him, of course, because a cephalopod bureaucrat locked in a masking-lined cell was invisible to every instrument on the station and cold and quiet to exactly 1 sense in the sector. There's a live weight in there, and it's not a weapon. It's scared. It's a person, she said, stopping at a blank compliance door the wardens had already passed twice, and Vantor's people opened it, and all was inside, unharmed but for the specific damage done to a mind that has spent hours certain it was about to die, his mottled skin flickering the fast gray of deep shock. He had told them everything, as Vantor had predicted, and it had mattered not at all, as she had also predicted, because by the time the syndicate wrung the plan out of him, the plan had already changed twice, and then happened in the open where no confession could stop it. "You are alive," Sarat said, crouching to the auditor's level, and all looked at him with the slow recognition of a creature surfacing from a deep place. "I told them the birth," all said. "I told them the plan. I told them her name. I am sorry, Sarat, I told them everything I am not built for." "You filed the case," Sarat said, "before any of this. When it cost you the most and helped you the least, you found the weapons and you filed the record and you did not unfile it. Everything after that everyone did. The plan changed a dozen times, but the record you filed is still the first crack, all. It is on the treaty account with your name on it, the first honest finding, the thing everything else grew out of. You did not fail. You were the first one of us who was brave, and you were brave on paper, in a locked room with no one watching, which is the only kind of brave that actually counts." All's skin slowed very gradually from gray toward something calmer, and he did not answer, but he reached out one suited limb and gripped Sarat's forearm, and Sarat let him, and that was answer enough. The cost of the concourse was counted over the following days, and Sarat made himself learn all of it, because a surgeon who will not look at the cost of what he set in motion has no business setting anything in motion. 9 were dead. 6 wardens, 2 salvage hands Acho at the east rail, and a young human named Buey who had gone down covering a gate so civilians could clear it, and 1 green-scaled enforcer who had thrown down his weapon and been killed anyway in the first chaos before the Count could name him safe, which was the death that sat hardest on Nadia. Sarat could tell, though she never said so. 31 wounded across 5 species. 1 cracked pane of daylight glass, sealed and scheduled for replacement. 411 weapons, recovered, logged, confirmed. The number exactly as Nadia had said it, so exactly that the treaty auditors checked it 3 times looking for the error that would let them believe a human had merely guessed. Against that, 100,000 souls on Osiri Reach who did not die in a coup, a neutral station that did not fall to House Vheim, a sector balance that did not tip into the war Deloon's ownership would have bought. Sarat did the arithmetic the way Nadia had taught him to do it, cold, both columns, no flinching. It was a good trade by any measure a reasonable person could apply. It did not feel like a good trade to the humans who had buried Achoa and Buey, and Sarat understood, watching them, that his species and Nadia's disagreed about almost everything except this. That a good trade and an acceptable one were not the same thing, and that you carried the difference whether or not the arithmetic came out in your favor. The treaty inquiry convened within the week, and it was nothing like the quiet buried thing Deloon had planned to give them. It could not be. The whole of it had gone out live to 9 blocks, unfiltered on a salvage hauler's stolen feed. The wrapped army bared in the daylight, the Count, the marshals turning, the charge spat into vacuum, all of it, in front of every honest eye in the sector at once. There was no version of the record to bury because there was no version that any single desk had ever held. Ray's illegal broadcast, the capital violation of 9 separate statutes, had made the truth of Osiri Reach into the one thing a conspiracy cannot survive. Common knowledge, held everywhere, owned by no one. House Vheim fell. Not in an afternoon, the way Deloon had meant to take the station, but in the slow grinding way that houses fall when 9 blocks have watched them try to seize the neutral heart of the sector and very nearly murder 100,000 people to cover it. Deloon herself was taken off station under treaty custody, elegant and silent to the end, and Sarat never saw her again and did not want to. The compliance office was purged. Half the executive tier resigned or was removed. Vantor, to her own visible discomfort, was made acting warden of the whole station, a promotion she accepted with the grim air of a creature who had wanted only to keep her small, clean corner of the world, and had instead been handed the whole dirty rest of it as a reward for competence. And the graft, the sense, the eye, the thing Sarat had grown behind a deaf girl's eyes in 3 careless days, became, exactly as Daloon had promised, the only thing the galaxy wanted to talk about. It began within a day, and it did not stop, and it changed the shape of the rest of Sarat's life. The feed had shown the whole sector what Nadia could do, and the whole sector drew the same conclusion Daloon had drawn in her daylight suite. That if one human-handed one new sense could count an invisible army out of the air, then the wrapped thing was over, the hidden edge was finished. The 4,000-year architecture of polite concealment had a crack in it the exact width of a surgeon's graft, and every power in the sector wanted to be the one holding the crack, or failing that, wanted to be certain no rival held it first. The requests came to Sarat through every channel he had, and several he did not. Blocks wanted the graft, houses wanted the graft, militaries wanted the graft, and security services, and this was the one that told him the truth of it. The same treaty office that governed the neutral ports wanted the graft, quietly, for its own auditors, so that no future Daloon could ever again hang an army in a ceiling. Everyone framed it as safety. Everyone was, in their own account, the good and careful hand that could be trusted with a sense that saw through every wall in civilization. Sarat read the requests, all of them, in the cadence Nadia had taught him, cold, both columns, and understood that not one of them was thinking about the girl at all. They were thinking about the eye. The girl was just the socket it had grown in. He did not answer any of them. He had one patient, and he had learned, over 11 days, that had rearranged everything he believed about medicine and the galaxy and his own gentle, clever, never-first species, that the patient came before the science, and that a healer who forgot which of the two he served was not a healer at all. He went to find Nadia to ask her what she wanted done with the thing he had put inside her head, and he found her, as he increasingly did in the human birth, in the loud, unafraid dark below the daylight, sitting on a supply crate among the salvage crews who had decided she was theirs and would not be talked out of it. She was not eating. She was not resting. She was sitting very still with her eyes closed and her head tipped, the way she did, reading a room, except the room was the whole station now, the whole cold and warm weight of it pressing on the organ he had grown, and Sarat realized, with a slow horror he should have felt 11 days ago, that she had not stopped reading it since the concourse, that she could not, that the weight he had given her did not have an off, only a down, and that she had refused the down, and that she was carrying the entire wrapped and unwrapped mass of ossuary reach in her small skull every waking second, and had been, without complaint, for 11 days. "You never let me dampen it," he said, crouching in front of her. "After, when it was over, I offered, you said no. You are still carrying all of it, Nadia." "Why?" She opened her eyes. "Because somebody has to," she said flatly, as though it were the most obvious arithmetic in the world. "There's still wrapped things on this station, Doctor. Fewer, but some. There's always going to be some, and I'm the only one who can feel them." She shrugged, a small, tired, human motion. "You made me the one who can see it. You don't get to make me the one who looks away." Sarat made his decision about the graft the way Nadia made all her decisions, cold, both columns, and it cost him the future his caste had raised him to want, and he never regretted it either. The safe thing, the profitable thing, the thing every scholar of his gentle, clever lineage would have done, was to hold the graft close, to make it a treasure of the Meshari healer houses, licensed carefully, sold high, doled out to the powers who could pay and trusted to behave. It would have made him the most important surgeon in the sector. It would have made his house first, for once, first at last, the thing his people had never been in all their recorded history. It would also have meant that whoever held the most grafts held the crack in the wall, and Sarat had spent 11 days learning exactly what powerful people did with a way to see through every wall in civilization. And he had watched one of them try to bury 100,000 souls in rubble rather than be seen. and he had decided that the last thing the galaxy needed was a sense like this held by anyone at all. So he published it, all of it, openly, freely, to every block and house and medical body in the sector at once, the way Rays had thrown the concourse feed to 9 blocks on a stolen channel, not because openness was noble, but because a secret everyone has is not a weapon anyone can hold. If they all had the graft, no one owned the crack. It was the coldest, most Nadia-shaped thing Sarat ever did, and his caste never forgave him for it, and he found that he did not much care, because he had stopped, somewhere in those 11 days, being a Meshari surgeon who wanted to be first, and had become something he did not have a clean word for, a healer who had learned arithmetic from a deathworlder and could no longer unlearn it. And then the galaxy tried to use the graft, and the galaxy learned the thing that Sarat had begun to suspect in the recovery ward on the 3rd day, and had not dared say aloud. The graft worked, on anyone. The engineered tissue took, the field sense grew, and a patient of any species who received it gained exactly what Sarat had originally designed, the gentle ambient perception of the shape of a room, the lean of a wall, the near-body warmth of a crowd. A blind ith could navigate by it. A cephalopod could feel the pressure map of a station. It was a fine sense, a useful sense, a genuine gift to the sensory impaired of a dozen species, and the medical bodies of the sector took it up with gratitude, and it healed people, which was, Sarat reminded himself, the entire thing he had set out to do. It did not make any of them into an eye. The ith felt walls. The cephalopod felt crowds. Not one of them of any species, given the identical graft grown from the identical tissue, developed the thing Nadia had grown in 3 days without instruction. The cold hole where the wrapped weapon was, the temperature that told a knife from a grief, the reflexive, relentless pointing at the threat that had counted an army out of the daylight. The powers who had clamored for the graft got their navigation sense and waited for the weapon eye to bloom, and it never came because it had never been in the graft at all. It had been in the human. Sarat wrote the paper that proved it, and it was the truest and most unwelcome thing he ever published. The graft gave every species a new sense. Only the human nervous system handed a new sense, immediately and without being asked turned it into a threat detector, took the gentle field perception and on its own, in 3 days in its sleep, wired it to the oldest priority a scorched world predator carries, which is find the danger first. Every species felt the room. Only the human felt the knife in the room, because only the human's whole architecture was built, under everything, around the question that had kept its kind alive on a world that killed lesser things in their millions. What in here is trying to kill it, and where is that thing, and how long before it moved? Give a gentle species a new sense and it learns to see. Give a human a new sense and it learns to hunt. Not out of cruelty. Sarat was emphatic about that, in the paper and everywhere else, because he had watched Nadia hold herself cold over the bodies of people she had met rather than let one wrong name slip out. But out of the simple, deep inheritance of a creature that had never once, in the whole of its evolution, been able to afford the luxury of feeling a room without first feeling the threat inside it. The galaxy had wanted the graft. It had needed the human. And there was, it turned out, no way to have the one without the other, which meant that the uncheatable eye the whole sector suddenly could not live without existed only in the skulls of the one species the galaxy had spent 1,000 years calling deathworlders and looking through. Sarat watched the sector absorb that, and it was the last great thing he learned in the education Nadia Cole had given him, and it was the one that finally made him understand what his species had gotten wrong for 4,000 years. They had thought the humans were dangerous because they were hard to kill. That was the old story, the Deathworld story, the one every block told, the scorched origin, the absurd durability, the small, dense creatures who walked into wrecks that killed anything sensible. And it was true as far as it went, but it was not the thing. The thing, Sarat understood now, watching a treaty office that governed 9 species quietly begin to hire human contractors. Salvage hands, dock hands, the disposable small dense creatures the station had ignored for a generation. To stand at the customs arches with a surgeon's graft behind their eyes and simply feel what walked through was that a human took every single thing you gave it and pointed it at the threat first, reflexively, gratefully, as though you had done it a kindness. You gave it a wrecked hull and it found the cargo. You gave it a dead station and it found the survivors. You gave it a new sense meant for feeling walls and it found, in 3 days, unprompted, the 400 hidden weapons you had spent 3 years and a fortune making unfeelable. And it counted them out of the daylight in a voice that never rose, because, on the world that made it, the ones whose voices rose did not come home. The wrapped thing was over. DeLune had been right about that and only that. Not because a surgeon had been careless, but because the galaxy had finally handed the one species that could not stop looking for the knife a way to feel every knife there was, and there was no putting that back. And Sarek found cold arithmetic, both columns, no flinching, that he did not want to put it back. A galaxy that could no longer hide its weapons from a human was a galaxy that would have to stop building armies in ceilings, because the ceilings would be watched now forever by small scarred creatures on supply crates who did not have the sense to look away. It was not a comfortable peace. It was not the polite 4,000-year fiction that had held because no one could prove what their neighbor carried. It was a harder thing, and a truer one, and it belonged, whether the galaxy liked it or not, to the deathworlders, because they were the only ones who could hold it. He went to tell Nadia that she had, without meaning to, become the first of a new profession that would outlast them both. He found her where he always found her now, on a crate in the human berth, eyes closed, head tipped, reading the shape of the station, carrying the weight she would not set down. By the turn of the season, the customs arch of Ossuary Reach had a chair beside it that had not been there before, and in the chair sat a small scarred human eating nothing in particular, and every wrapped thing that tried to walk through the neutral heart of the sector walked past her first. Sarek came to watch her work when his rounds allowed it, because it never stopped being the strangest and finest thing he had ever seen. The treaty office had made it official, in the pedantic bureaucratic way of Warden Captain Vantor, who now ran the station and had insisted on doing the thing properly or not at all. A new post, a new profession, a treaty-sealed role with a title so dry it made Sarek's translator hesitate. Field Auditor, Sensory Class. In the daylight of the concourse, it meant one human in a chair by the arch, and it meant that no one in the whole sector could bring a wrapped weapon through Ossuary Reach anymore, and everyone knew it, and the knowing had changed the station more than the Count ever had. The wrapped things had mostly stopped coming. That was the part the arithmetic-minded found most interesting. When the concealment worked, everyone concealed. The moment the concealment failed reliably, the concealing stopped being worth the cost, and the flow of masking-wrapped ordnance through the neutral port had simply dried up, the way a smuggling route dries when the smugglers learn the searcher does not miss. Nadia caught fewer weapons every week now, not because there were more hidden but because there were fewer, because a hidden weapon was worth nothing at the one port where it could not stay hidden. And the whole cold economy of the wrapped edge had begun, quietly, to unwind across the sector, one uncrossable arch at a time. "It's boring now," Nadia told him, which from her was the highest praise a piece could earn. "Good boring. Most of what comes through is just people. Warm and open and carrying nothing but their groceries." She tipped her head at the crowd flowing under the amber light. "I like the boring days. On the boring days nobody's building anything in a ceiling." Then, mid-sentence, in the flat cadence that Sarek's heart still clenched to hear, without a flicker of change in her small, tired face. Cephalopod, third in the transit line, wrapped piece under the pressure suit, along the left arm, cold, safety on. He's not committed. He's scared. He keeps starting to turn around. She was already lifting one hand to the warden channel Vantor had wired into her chair. Core, third in line, cephalopod, left arm wrapped. Warn him first. He wants to be talked out of it, that's why he's still in the line and not through the arch already. Give him the door before you give him the cuffs. Sarat watched a warden move to the transit line, unhurried, and watched a cephalopod broker with a wrapped weapon along his arm see the warden coming and go very still, and watched the moment. He had seen it a dozen times now, and it never stopped moving him, where the person with the hidden thing understood that the hidden thing had never been hidden, and made a choice in the open, in the daylight, with a small deaf human watching him from a chair. The broker took the weapon off his arm. He set it on the deck. He raised his empty limbs, and a warden walked him quietly aside, and no one died, and the transit line closed the gap and moved on, and it was over in the length of a held breath, and the concourse never even noticed. He'll be fine, Nadia said, settling back into the chair. He wasn't a killer. He was somebody who thought he needed a wrapped edge to feel safe walking through here, and he didn't, and now he knows he didn't, and next time he'll come through warm and open like everybody else. She closed her eyes. That's most of them, Doctor. That's the thing nobody tells you about the wrapped things. Most of them aren't armies. Most of them are just scared people who thought hiding it was the only way to be safe. And you take the hiding away, Sarat said. And it turns out most of them are safer without it, said Nadia Cole. Funny how that works. They came for her too, of course. Not to kill her now, that season had passed, but to own her, which the powerful preferred anyway. The offers were endless, and they were all the same offer wearing different faces. A block wanted her for its own arches, exclusively, for a salvage-hand's wage multiplied by numbers she had never seen. A house wanted her as a personal reader, to stand at its lord's shoulder and feel the rapt intent in every room he entered, and offered her a life of soft rooms and amber wine, and never eating nothing on a hard chair again. A security service wanted her for work it would not describe in front of Sarat. The treaty office itself, which employed her, wanted more of her, wanted her to sit for its scholars and be measured, wanted to understand the eye so that it could, the word was always careful, replicate her, though replication had already failed on every species that was not hers, which the treaty office knew and would not quite say. Nadia listened to all of it, in the human berth on a supply crate, with the salvage crews around her pretending not to listen and listening to every word, and she turned each offer over with the same flat care she gave a wrapped weapon in a transit line, and she said no to every one of them. And Sarat, who had learned by now not to be surprised by her, was surprised anyway by the reason. They all want to take me somewhere, she said, when the last of them had gone and it was just her and Sarat and Ray's in the loud dark. Off the arch, off the station, somewhere I'd be theirs and nobody else's. She shook her head. But the whole point of the arch is that it's neutral. It's the one port where nobody shoots you for being a deathworlder. You told me that, Doctor, the first week, before any of this. The one place everybody agreed to be safe. That only works if the reader belongs to everybody. The second I'm one house's reader, I'm not keeping the peace anymore. I'm just a better wrapped weapon that one house owns. She leaned back against a cargo stack. No. I'll stay at the arch, and I'll belong to the treaty, which means I belong to nobody, which means I belong to everybody, which is the only version of this where I'm still the thing that keeps 100,000 people from getting buried in a ceiling. They don't get to make me a weapon. He already made me an eye. I'd rather be the eye. Rays from the dark said, told you, to know one and everyone, with the gravel satisfaction of a man whose read on a person had been proven correct, and Nadia almost smiled, and Sarat sat among the deathworlders in the berth they had made their own and understood that he was, improbably at the end of everything, happy. Not the small, clean happiness his caste had raised him to want, first at last, published and praised, but a larger and stranger thing. The happiness of a healer who had set out to give a deaf girl back a way to feel the world and had, entirely by accident, given the whole galaxy one instead. He asked her once, near the end of that season, The question he had been carrying since the recovery ward, since the third day, since she first turned her head toward a wall that had nothing behind it and told him the truth about what was there. "Do you ever wish I had not done it?" Sarah said. They were at the arch in the amber daylight on one of the boring days she loved. The graft. If you had known where it would lead, the concourse, the ones who died, the weight you cannot set down, the life you cannot leave because 100,000 people need you in that chair. If I had told you on the first day everything it would cost, would you have signed? Nadia was quiet for a while, and Sarah let her be quiet, because he had learned that her silences were arithmetic and not indecision. "I was deaf," she said finally. "You know what the accident took. It didn't just take the sound. It took the work. I couldn't crew a hull anymore, couldn't hear the pressure warnings, couldn't hear my own crew call a fault. I was going to get shipped back to a rock I left for a reason, to sit in a quiet I never asked for, and be nothing and no one for the rest of a very long human life." She tipped her head at the crowd flowing warm and open under the daylight, the boring, beautiful crowd of a station where nobody was building anything in a ceiling. "You didn't give me a weapon, Doctor. Everybody keeps calling it a weapon. You gave me back a way to be useful. That's all I ever asked you for. That's the only question I asked that first day, will it let me keep working? And you said probably yes." She almost smiled again, the small, tired human motion he had come to treasure. "You undersold it a little." The delegation from the inner blocks came to disbelieve her in person, because that was what the powerful did with a thing they could not control. They traveled a long way to stand in front of it and insist to its face that it was smaller than the reports. They arrived in a cluster of slate-skinned nobles and four-armed scholars and one tall functionary, all of them important, all of them skeptical in the particular way of creatures who had built careers on the old fiction and did not want it to be over. They had read the treaty record and watched the concourse feed and commissioned their own scholars' papers, and they had concluded, as powerful skeptics always conclude, that there must be a trick, a hidden instrument, a fed signal, a clever fraud dressed up as a miracle, because the alternative was that a salvage hand in a chair had made their whole civilization transparent, and that was not a thing an important person could afford to simply believe. They asked to test her. Vantor, who despised them with a warden's pure bureaucratic contempt, allowed it, because a test passed in front of skeptics was worth more than 100 passed in front of the convinced. Sarah stood at the edge of it and watched a scholarly four-armed elite, of his own species, he noted with a complicated feeling, a meshari of exactly the caste he had been raised in, explain to a small deaf human at some length why what she did was theoretically impossible. Nadia listened to none of it, because she could not hear it, and Sarah did not translate, because she had asked him long ago not to bother translating this particular speech, which she received from a new important visitor roughly once a week, and had stopped finding novel. When the scholar finished, the delegation produced their test. They had prepared it carefully. One of them carried a wrapped object masking grade, the best that money bought, sealed in the delegation's own laboratories, its signature erased by every technique the inner blocks possessed. They had not told anyone which of them carried it. They stood in a row before her chair, 8 important creatures of 4 species, and they invited the human to say which one, if she truly could, and Sarat saw the small, cruel confidence in them, the certainty that they had built a wall she could not see through, that they would expose the fraud and go home and put the fiction back together. Nadia did not open her eyes. The one on the left carries a wrapped object along the spine, flat, cold, about the size of 2 hands, and it's not a weapon, she said, in the flat cadence, not moving, not performing, reading a row of the most powerful people in the sector the way she read the transit line on a boring afternoon. The third from the left carries a wrapped weapon in an ankle sheath he didn't declare to his own delegation. So either your test has 2 hidden things in it, or one of you brought a gun to a demonstration and didn't tell the others. The 5th one is carrying a wrapped recorder, running, aimed at me, which is rude but not my problem. And the seventh one, she paused and tipped her head, and something in her flat voice went, for just a moment, gentle. The seventh one is carrying a wrapped medical device, close to the chest, keeping a failing heart going, and he's kept it wrapped a long time because his people don't show weakness. And I'm not going to say any more about that one in front of the others, and you should be ashamed you made me feel it to prove a point. The row of important creatures was very silent. The one on the left drew out a flat wrapped object the size of 2 hands, the test, the sealed decoy, the impossible-to-detect thing their laboratories had built. And it was exactly where she had said, and it was exactly what she had said, and it was not a weapon. And then, in the awful silence, the third from the left slowly drew a wrapped weapon from an ankle sheath he had told no one about, because a small deaf human had just informed his entire delegation that he had brought a hidden gun to a diplomatic demonstration, and there was no version of the room in which he could pretend she was wrong without the weapon in his hand proving her right. And the seventh, the one with the wrapped device close to his chest, said nothing at all, and looked at the human in the chair with an expression Sarat could not read across species, and put one 4-fingered hand over the place where the thing that kept him alive was hidden, and inclined his head to her, very slightly, in a gesture that needed no translation in any tongue in the sector. The delegation went home. They did not put the fiction back together. You cannot put a fiction back together in front of the people you brought to watch it die, and they had brought each other, and each of them had watched, and each of them carried the watching home, and that was how the recalibration spread through the inner blocks, not by argument, not by paper, but by important skeptics traveling a long way to disbelieve a salvage hand in a chair, and going home unable to lie about what they had felt or feel. Other stations asked for readers after that, and the treaty office, to its credit, said yes, and the profession Nadia had accidentally invented began to spread across the neutral ports of the sector, one arch at a time. They were all human. They had to be. The eye had never bloomed in anyone else, and by now the whole sector knew it and had stopped pretending otherwise. So the treaty office went looking for humans, not soldiers, not the celebrated deathworld warriors of the old lurid stories, but the small, dense, disposable ones the stations had ignored for a generation, the salvage hands and dock crews and contract haulers, and offered them a surgeon's graft and a chair by an arch and a wage and a purpose. And the humans, being humans, took the new sense and pointed it at the threat first. Every one of them, exactly as Nadia had. In the wrapped economy of the sector, unwound arch by arch by arch. It did not make the humans loved. Sarat wanted that in the record too, at the end, because it was true, and because the lurid stories always left it out. The other species did not learn to love the deathworlders because a few of them now sat in chairs keeping the peace. They learned something more durable than love and more useful. They learned to stop hiding weapons in ceilings, because the ceilings were watched now, and they learned to be careful what they carried through a neutral port, because the port had an eye, and they learned, slowly, grudgingly, across a generation, that the small hard creatures from the scorched world were not the monsters of the old stories or the miracles of the new ones, but simply the one kind of person in the whole galaxy who, handed anything at all, would use it first and best to find the knife in the room. Which was, Sarat had come to think, the truest thing anyone had ever learned about them, and the one that should have been obvious from the start, to a galaxy that had spent 4,000 years calling their world a death world and never once stopping to ask what a creature made by such a world would be for. The new reader arrived a year to the season after the concourse, and she was younger than Nadia, and the weight nearly broke her in the first hour, and Sarat watched Nadia Cole do the last thing in this account that he ever needed to understand about the difference between his galaxy and hers. The girl's name was Della Marsh, and she was a cargo hand off a hauler that had been crushed against a dock in a bad berthing, and she had lost both legs below the knee and half her hearing, and the treaty office had offered her the graft and the chair the way it now offered them to the human wounded across the sector. and she had taken it, because a cargo hand with no legs and half an ear had the same short list of futures Nadia had once had, and the chair was better than the rock. Sarat had done the graft himself. He did most of them now. It was his work, the whole of his work, and he had stopped apologizing to his caste for it. But the graft was the easy part. The weight was the hard part, and no surgeon could teach it. And so they had brought Della Marsh to Ossery Reach to sit beside the first of them and learn the only thing that mattered, which was not in any paper Sarat had ever written. She was shaking when Sarat brought her to the arch. The concourse was full, a busy day, thousands of warm open bodies, and scattered through them, the handful of cold wrapped things that still tried the neutral port and were still caught. And Della sat in the second chair Vantor had installed beside the first, and she took the full weight of it for the first time in a crowd, and Sarat watched a young human's face come apart under the pressure of feeling every hidden thing in the busiest space in the sector at once, the way Nadia's face had never quite come apart. 3 days out of surgery in a recovery ward, a lifetime ago. "It's too much," Della said. Her voice was high and fast and frightened, and Sarat's hearts went out to her, because she was doing exactly what a sensible small plaything should do when handed too much threat at once. She was overwhelmed, she was breaking, she was human in the ordinary way and not yet in the terrible one. "I can't, there's too many, I can't tell them apart, they're all screaming, I can't." "Yes you can," Nadia said. She did not open her eyes, she did not turn her head. She sat in her chair with the whole station pressing on her, and she spoke to the panicking girl beside her in the flat measured cadence that Sarat had first heard through a maintenance wall, and he understood that he was watching the discipline pass from one skull to the next, the cold thing, the made thing, the thing that was not in the graft. "They're not screaming," Nadia said. "That's the first thing. It feels like screaming because it's new and it's all at once, but it's not screaming, it's just wait, and wait holds still if you let it. You don't have to feel all of them. You'll never be able to feel all of them and stay a person. So you don't. You feel the fast ones first, the ones on bodies, the ones that can hurt somebody in the next 10 seconds, and you let the slow ones be background, the cases and the ceilings and the things that can't move. Fast ones first, bodies first, in the order they're most likely to fire. A pause. And you don't get angry and you don't get scared and you don't get loud, because the second you do, you slow down, and the second you slow down, somebody you could have named gets hurt. So you stay cold. Not because you don't feel it. Because you do, and because staying cold is the only way to be any use to the person the cold thing is going to save. Della's shaking slowed, not all at once. But it slowed, the way the enforcers had gone still on the concourse floor, the way the marshals had turned, the way a human took a thing that should have broken it and turned the thing instead into a job. "Fast ones first," Della repeated unsteadily. "Bodies first, stay cold." "Stay cold," Nadia agreed. "There's a wrapped piece cephalopod transit gate 6 along the hip. Slow. He's not committed, they mostly aren't. You take that one. Name it to core, first one's yours." And Sarat watched Della Marsh, a year younger human with no legs and half an ear and 1 hour of the weight, take a breath and steady and reach for the warden channel, and say, in a voice that shook only a little and would shake less every day after, "Core, transit gate 6. Cephalopod hip wrapped." And a warden moved, and a wrapped thing was found, and a small crime did not happen in the daylight, and the first weapon of the second reader's whole long career was counted out of the air, and the concourse never noticed, because that was the entire point, because a peace kept well is a peace no one notices being kept. Sarat found Nadia at the arch on a boring day near the end of his account, and he had come to tell her that his work was done. The graft was published and free and spreading. The readers were trained and multiplying. The wrapped economy was unwinding across a sector that would never be able to hide its weapons from a human again, and that he was old, for a Meshari, and thinking of setting his instruments down at last. She heard him out. Then she was quiet for a while, in the amber daylight, reading the boring, warm crowd she loved. "You know what the strangest part is," she said finally. "Everybody thinks you gave me something. The blocks, the delegations, the papers, they all talk about the eye like it's a thing you added, a piece you bolted on, and now the deathworlder can see the knife." She shook her head slow. "But you didn't add anything, Doctor. You said it yourself in the paper, every species gets the graft and just feels the room. The knife part, the cold part, the counting, that was already in me. It was already in all of us. You didn't build the eye. You just gave it a window." She tipped her head at the crowd, warm and open and unafraid, flowing under the daylight of a station where nobody built anything in ceilings anymore. The whole galaxy spent 4,000 years being scared of what we'd do if we ever got our hands on their weapons, and then you handed one of us a way to feel every weapon there is. And you know what she did with it. "Tell me," Sarat said, though he knew. "She sat down in a chair," Nadia said, "and she kept the peace. Turns out that's what the knife was always for." Nobody ever asked. Sarat looked at her a long time, the small, scarred human in the chair by the arch, the clinic grease long gone from her cheek, the graft line of faded silver seam at her neck, the weight of a whole station resting quiet on the window he had opened in her, carried the way she carried everything without complaint, because somebody had to and she was the one who could. He had set out, a lifetime ago, to give a deaf girl back a way to feel the world. He had not known what the world would turn out to be, or what she would turn out to be, or what his gentle, clever, never-first species would finally learn about the small, hard creatures it had spent so long looking through. He knew now. He had learned it one wrapped weapon at a time, in a recovery ward and a maintenance corridor and a customs annex, and a concourse full of the counted dead, and it was the only thing he was certain of at the end of a long and reordered life. That you could take everything from these creatures, their sound, their legs, their world, their place in a galaxy that feared them, and hand them one new way to sense the danger, and they would not turn it on you. They would sit down in a chair in the daylight and stay cold, and keep the knife pointed at the one place it belonged, which was outward at the dark, between the people they had decided were theirs and everything that would do them harm. "No," Sarat said at last. "No, I don't suppose anybody ever asked." Nadia Cole did not answer him. She had already tipped her head and closed her eyes, and gone back to reading the room. The whole warm, boring, beautiful room of a station full of people who would never know how close it had come, or who had kept it, or what it had cost the small, deaf woman in the chair to keep it and never once look away. "Cephalopod Gate 3, she said to no one, to everyone, in the flat, cold cadence that had counted an army out of the daylight and would go on counting quietly for the rest of a very long life. "Wrapped, along the arm, safety on, a breath. I've got him. Next."